Mr. Cummings, just a quick question regarding the synchronous learners, the 403. Do we happen to know what the how that's broken out between elementary and secondary?
We do. I don't have it with me, but I would say that there were 17 elementary students. I do remember that. And I think the middle school total was around 45, if I remember, somewhere around that. It might have been closer to 50. So the great majority of them are in the high school.
Okay, and just to be clear, these are people that are permanently synchronous, not, this is in addition to the ones that are quarantined and having to do that, correct?
No, these are, yes, these are students who, for now, are not comfortable coming into the building, are not part of the RLA, and for different reasons, they could be in quarantine. Well, actually, this would not include quarantine. These are students, that would be a separate category, because that's a far more fluid category.
Okay, so less than 20 have opted at this point at elementary to live stream into the classroom, and roughly just under 50 for middle school.
I believe that's right, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
Hi, yes, again, thanks from here. The reports from my boys today were, there was some anxiety about going in and seeing how full it was going to be, but I got the sense that everything went very, very smoothly. I know that particularly my high school son was worried about parking, and he seems to have found a spot just fine. So a couple of small things. I wonder if it might be possible at some point, and whether any of the board members might be interested in taking a tour now that the buildings are at full capacity. We saw them kind of in pandemic mode at hybrid capacity, but it would be interesting to see the contrast, whether that's something that we could arrange.
Yeah, we certainly could do that, absolutely.
All right. And another thing, I don't know whether this belongs here or not, I was curious what the administration is thinking about the student petition that was going around about the half-day Wednesdays. I heard last that some 600 students had signed it. And I remember the staff even reached out to me and made a case for it, which I found compelling. I have to say that my general inclination is, now that we have them in school, and we've been talking about minutes in person, I'm reluctant to pull that back, but I'm just curious whether you have an opinion about that.
I think that you mentioned it, one of the very first things you said, Mr. Peterson, was that there is this level of kind of anxiety, I think, and I think that has brought another level of stress to all this. And one of the things that we're all very conscious of is the tenuousness of this arrangement right now, as it's kind of been all year. I was on the Department of Public Health phone call this morning, as usual, on Tuesday, and Dr. Carter, the state chief epidemiologist, spoke again about the concern around the variants, and so there's this. We know, as we saw when the elementary came back, that, and even back to before the holidays and the issue at Woods, that if people aren't vigilant in their use of the mitigation strategies, staying home if they're sick, those are the things that put all of this at risk. So I think that there is a level of stress among the students, there's a level of stress among the staff, and I think that's a very real thing, and it begs further conversation with our administrators. Now that we're back, how is it, is it manifesting itself, and if so, how is that manifesting itself? And it probably, it may require further conversation with the board.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm sure that this was, we talk about celebrations, but there is a level of, uncertainty going forward, and I do think, in the communications that I saw from Paul Cavanna from Ward, also talked about, recommitting to, as you say, the mitigation strategies. So I'm sure that we're all going to be watching that going forward, but I am cautiously optimistic. Thank you.
Ms. Guernsey?
Hi, just a quick question. And first, obviously, just want to echo the board members before me. I'm just absolutely astounded by the feat of reopening these schools. Gotten so much good feedback about the last 2 days, and it's just enormously exciting. So thank you for everything you've done. I have heard a lot of concerns still about lunch because of the sort of increased risk factor there without the mask wearing. And what I'm wondering, and this might be more of a health department question, but if we end up, assuming that we might quarantine someone based on their position at lunch at some point, would someone be tracking that so that if we find that there is spread in school at lunch, that we would be able to address that specific issue rather than, in the like, will that be indicated somehow behind the scenes at Board of Health that this, because the kids won't know why they're quarantining necessarily, but is there someone able to do so? And that might, I don't know if that's helpful in terms of, planning and tracking the success of the model that we're using now for lunchroom mitigation.
I want to make, are you asking, are they going to be able to determine if indeed a transmission were to happen, that it occurred at lunch?
I don't know that would be possible, but to somehow track the students that are quarantining based on their lunch position, and if we see a trend there, that it would be addressed in some way, because it is so different than the other environments that are existing in the school.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we, when the health department has been involved with concerns around transmission, this isn't just a Fairfield thing, it's whether the state or other local districts, they are looking to go back and try to determine to the best of their ability where that might be occurring. And then as a result of that, thinking of additional mitigation strategies that might have to be put in place to stop that. So, again, the first day of the 6/12, students were behaving very responsibly, but we know that, again, things are going to naturally begin to slip as they do, and we're just going to have to maintain, continual vigilance on that and remind the students that they have to, put that mask back up when they're done eating. Those are the types of things. But I think that's certainly something that will have to be considered.
Up on that quickly, did I read something about QR codes being used for that?
Yeah, there's two major strategies. At the middle school, they've created a Google spreadsheet. So when the kids go in, they log in their seat where they are. So the school can track back who's where. At the high schools, they're using QR codes. So each of the table has a QR code, and the kids use their phones to log in, and that way they also keep an electronic record. So both ways they're keeping an electronic record of where. And at the elementary, it's an assigned seat. There's a number on it, so and the kids all know where they're supposed to go.
Mrs. Maxinelli?
Thank you. And likewise, just a wonderful first day, and the tone utterly set by the staff. That whatever their reservations may be, we're so positive, at least with my child's interactions and what he reported on. So my thanks also to the staff just for that. It was very powerful. I just feel the need to put out there that regarding those Wednesday half days, I appreciate that we are not jumping into anything, that we are letting things settle down. Because first of all, within 2 weeks, at the high school at least, there's of course the SAT, PSAT day, so there's no school straight off there. A week later, there's Good Friday off. A week after that, it's April break. So already it's not the hardcore full-time, full-out March that in many ways you often think of. So I appreciate that people are getting the chance to settle into this before we start cutting into instructional time again. But happy to have that conversation in the future. Which brings me to I certainly appreciate that each of the schools they're going to be working out their own issues, and be very responsive. But is there going to be any type of feedback loop or a Google form or something set up whereby staff and or kids can more formally submit noticing this as an issue, wanted to have it on somebody's radar for attention, whether it's going to school administration or district administration, like in a week, in homeroom, kids fill out a form, what have you noticed, what's made you uncomfortable, anything like that, to get feedback so that we're not relying solely on word of mouth or those students who are comfortable speaking up.
We haven't thought to do anything formally. It's something we can look at. As you say, there's a lot of informal feedback loops, but in order to collectively collect that information, it's something we could look at to do. Yep.
And again, not looking to make busy work. It's if someone can genuinely find a productive use for it, it would just be something perhaps interesting to consider ahead of time. So that was that. And also, as feedback for the board, as it starts to come up, if there are going to be any more policy issues, that need to be addressed more quickly than others, it's just the sooner it starts getting on our radar, from the board level, the better. For quarantining, now that ruling has come out regarding, and I can't remember where I read it, that once 2 weeks outside of being fully vaccinated, quarantining is no longer necessary. Is that something but therefore then we have to get records from our staff for who has been quarantined, if that's going to start to become the practice as of mid-April for those who got vaccinated March 1st? Is there something in the works for that?
The way that actually came up on the DPH call this morning, and the State Department of Education attorney issued some cautions about our ability to actually ask that question. But she did say that in the course of a transmission investigation, a health official could ask that question of a staff member, and the staff member or a student could refuse to answer. But based on it was perfectly acceptable that in the course of that investigation, that conversation, that person in that role asked that question. And that could then determine, as you say, if a majority of our staff are going to get their second dose on April 1st, essentially for us it would be after the break. But yes, it could reduce the number of quarantines among staff.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering how they're going to, because I know obviously we're not requiring it, and not necessarily soliciting it. So that's how it could be done through the health officials. Okay, good to know. I was hoping that at some point sooner rather than later, but definitely not this week, things have to settle down, but that we could get an update on what's going on with our elementary school class sizes as well as our RLA class sizes. And again, no expectation of the immediate, because I know that's sorting out, and what might look like a daunting number might work out just fine in the schools, but since we are not meeting, again, as far as I know, for another month, I would hope that we as a board could get that sooner. I'm only waiting because he's writing. Okay, sorry. And then the last thing I just wanted to ask is that where are we, and I'm so sorry to say this, but where are we regarding the issue of testing? Normally, at some point in that window of March to May, we're looking at SBACs, for example. What is, and if it's something we're supposed to know, I'm sorry if I missed it, but what is the word on what's going to happen with that at this point?
We could have Dr. Savachansik speak to that.
Good evening, James Evajancic, Executive Director of Instruction and Curriculum. So the Smarter Balanced as well as the NGSS testing is going to happen in 3 through 8. Elementary schools are starting after the April break. The window for the state opens the end of March. I think it's March 30th. At this point, we've decided to hold off until after April break to begin the testing. Across 3 through 8, buildings are developing their schedules as we speak. We do have to worry about our remote learners, as you know. The state has opened up a remote testing portal in practice, so students can test at home for Smarter Balanced at this point if they're in our remote learning academy or are a remote student at this point. Otherwise, everybody else will follow the test protocols that they normally would have tested under in previous years.
But we're not doing the NGSS in high school.
So it is grades, I believe it's 5, 8, and 10.
Okay, so we are
11, excuse me.
Yeah.
We are, yeah, we do have to follow. We have no waiver for any testing at this point. The state did apply for a participation waiver, which was granted. You may remember in our accountability report, there's an expectation of 95% student participation. And with all the remote learners, I think they thought about that and decided to apply for the waiver in the event that we can't get the 95% participation.
And if I could just follow up on that, what is the time commitment to the high school portion of that?
The NGSS? I don't have it with me. Ms. LaSala is on the call, who would probably know it right offhand. I just don't have the manual with me in terms of the average testing. I don't know if we can queue her up.
Ms. LaSala, Marco?
Hello, this is Justine. Hello.
We can hear you.
I don't know if she heard the question.
Hi, everyone. This is Justine LaSala, Director of Science. As far as the NGSS goes, there's a very large window this year. I believe it goes from April 24th to the beginning of June. And every building was trying to, I think, move the NGSS testing towards the end of May to not interfere with SAT, Smarter Balance, and all the rest.
And so my question had been, like, what is the reduction in instructional time because kids are taking this test? What is the time commitment for the juniors who are taking this test?
What is the time commitment for them to actually take the test? It's a 2-hour test.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You are.
Any other questions, Mrs. Mascanelli? Ms. Jacobson?
Hi, Jen Jacobson. I have a quick follow-up on that. Do you know if they adjusted the content at all in terms of, is the expectation the same as it was before in terms of where you were supposed to be in your curriculum in terms of those standards on these tests, or did they scale that back at all?
It's my understanding that it has remained the same. So the vertical scales remain the same, and students will still be asked grade level questions on the Smarter Balance tests 3 through 8.
As if it was a typically instructed year?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pickup?
I don't know if this goes to Mrs. LaSala or someone else. I know some districts are treating the NGSS tests for 11th graders like an SAT half day. I didn't know if that was something that we were considering here in Fairfield.
Do you want to get?
I would defer to the building principals as far as the schedule. We had an initial conversation about the schedule, but I don't think it's finalized yet. But I think there is a possibility of testing the juniors without having closing school for the rest of the grade. I think we talked about that, but I would defer to them.
There's no plans, as I know at this point, to create a delayed schedule or an early dismissal, I should say, for the 11th grade testing.
Anything else? Ms. Pickup? Any other questions about reopening? Any idea of bus, how many kids are riding the bus, or is drop-off, pickup? How did that go, just getting to and from school?
I heard a couple different, well, I think it's varied by location. I did hear that at a couple of the schools, elementary and middle, there actually were more students on the bus today than there has been. One of the elementary schools who had been very concerned about traffic on the road in front of the school did not have that concern the last couple of days. So there's more students are actually on the bus. So again, we're doing seating arrangements, and we have high expectations that the bus company is going to be following those expectations, because again, the safer we make it, the longer this lasts.
Okay, seeing no other questions, again, thank you to the staff, thank you to the community and the parents and our students for their patience in getting to this day, and for being team players and being responsible with their mask wearing and their distancing, and just ask that it continues, because the safer we are, the longer schools will stay open. We're excited by the last couple of days, and still seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, which is very, very good news for us all. All right, moving on. I think we're still, for the literacy, we need another 15 minutes, I think, before we start that presentation. So why don't we move on, seeing no objection, to approval of the proposed AP Physics C text. Can I have the motion? The Board of Education approve the AP Physics C text, Physics for Scientists and Engineers, a Strategic Approach with Modern Physics, 4th edition. Mr. Peterson, seconded by Ms. Jacobson. Any discussion? Questions? Okay, seeing none, we will take it to the board for a vote. All in favor of approving? Motion carries 9-0. Moving on, approval of policies 2133, 2133, point 11 and 1100. That the Board of Education approve these policies. 2133, administration, headmasters, and principals. Policy 2133.11, administration, housemaster, and assistant principals. And policy 1100, community relations, communication with the public. Mrs. Maxinelli, seconded by Ms. Jacobson. Mrs. Maxinelli?
I received no questions about this, so if people are ready to vote, great. If they have questions now, I'd be happy to try to address them.
Does anybody have any questions for Mrs. Maxinelli? Seeing none, we'll take it to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 9. Mr. Mancusi, do you want to start the presentation now, or should we wait till 8:15? I know that we were waiting.
I think we could probably start. We could go through our portion, and then Margie Gillis is going to be hopping on the call at 8:15. So at 8:15 we should be, or when we're done, we should be off.
Okay. All right, thank you, we're going to start the presentation, Early Literacy Academy. Mr. Mancusi will be presenting with Dr. Zavajanzik, Mrs. Holcomb, and Dr. Swingler. This is item number 4 on the agenda, being that we went out of order. But before we go to the presentation, I will give it to the superintendent for a brief introduction.
Thank you. Before everybody begins, I want to first of all thank them for all the work they put into this. But one of the things we wanted to do tonight in talking about the Literacy Academy is we wanted to take a step back, actually, and frame the Literacy Academy against the work that the district is doing around early literacy. I'm going to seize every opportunity we have to talk about curriculum instruction because we don't do it enough, and certainly our lives have been consumed with other things over the past year. But last year, the board adopted a budget that included greater efforts to address phonics, phonemic awareness at the elementary, particularly in the early grades. We've not really had a chance to talk about that. And the work that Mr. Mancusi and his staff is doing to implement the Literacy Academy falls in line with that work. So you'll see in their presentation tonight, in many ways, a tiered approach to literacy instruction that takes place in the schools. And as you know, in the SRBI format, we talk about Tier 1 being the core instruction, Tier 2, Tier 3 being the intervention levels of instruction. And we wanted to make sure that for the board's awareness and for the public's awareness, where the Literacy Academy fell in that work and how it emanates from the core work that's happening in the district and how it will continue to support and work to support learners who are not successful in that core work and need the additional levels of instruction and support. So again, I thank them for all the work they've done, not only to prepare for this presentation, but to get ready for this program, and of course the work that has to be done now as we go forward to gear us up for next year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mancusi, floor
Good
is
evening,
yours.
everybody. Before I turn it over to Lynn Holcomb to start, I just wanted to introduce behind me to my right is Zoe Dolan. She is our new special education elementary coordinator who will be starting in the Fairfield Public Schools on Monday. Zoe currently is the pre-K through 5 special education coordinator for the North Haven Public Schools, where she has been since 2012. Prior to that, I had the pleasure of working with Zoe in the Wallingford Public Schools, where she served as our special education department head for grades 3 and 5. And prior to that, she was a special education teacher for the Rocky Hill Public Schools. She has background in program development. She has experience working with multiple different disabilities, and she also has a lot of experience in the area of literacy. So that's why she is primarily here tonight. But we welcome Zoe, and I wanted to give the board the opportunity to meet her.
Thank you, Mr. Mancusi. Welcome. We're happy that you're here at the district and happy that you're here with us tonight. And we look forward to getting to know you better. We were in the elevator together, and we didn't realize who each other's were. So it's nice to formally meet you. Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Mancusi.
Thank you so much. And with that, I will, we will begin our presentation with Lynn Holcomb.
Hi, everyone. We're looking forward to talking to you tonight about our literacy. Got it. Is it on? Hello? Got it. Okay. So we're looking forward to talking to you about literacy learning in Fairfield Public Schools.
You're going to speak into the microphone, please.
Okay, sorry. All right, let me know if you don't hear me.
That's better.
Okay. Our concentration will be on early literacy, but we did want to give you the pre-K-12 vision of literacy in the district for all students. So Jen will start us off.
Good evening, everyone. Be here with you tonight. Dr. Parrish, thank you. In order to set the context for the work around early literacy, we wanted to bring forward the MPS vision that was created in 2017 with a pre-K-12 team of teachers and administrators under the guidance of Rachel Gabriel, Associate Professor of Literacy at UConn, who also serves on the Board of Directors with the International Literacy Association. So please entertain me as we put this front and center in our discussion this evening as I read this out loud, and for us all to anchor our thinking of what we want for kids. Thank you, sir. Okay. Thank you. Excellent. Are we okay? Thank you, sir. So what I would love to do is just take a moment, read this to you, to anchor our thinking as we start our conversation with our work around early literacy here in Fairfield Public Schools, but also to think about what we want for all children, pre-K-12 in the district. Every student every day will read, converse, interact, and write with joy, curiosity, challenge, and opportunity to practice skills, explore problems, revise and build ideas about ourselves and others and our world based on self-reflection, peer, and teacher feedback. By doing so, we will build engaged citizens who understand, evaluate, develop, revise, and share ideas based on their diverse perspectives. We believe that when learners develop this mindset of belief in their own capacity as readers, writers, and thinkers, and in the significance and the value of their work, that they are able to overcome challenges, solve problems, thrive, and truly celebrate their growth. As you all know, and as we continue to lead forward, we believe literacy is the foundation of all learning, as it is through the reading and writing processes that students make meaning and deepen their understanding of the world around them. In our continual pursuit of improvement, another district-wide team reconvened in the summer of 2019 to expand the literacy vision into actionable literacy learning targets that transcend not only the ELA reading and writing classes, but also content area work. The team used several seminal documents to articulate these 8 areas of literacy learning in the efforts to calibrate our collective expectations for students and the work we wanted to see in our classrooms. This work continues to impact our thinking in SRBI, in the organizing of our instructional planning, in our professional development around literacy and learning, and will continue to evolve as we engage in our ELA curriculum review. Lynn and I are committed, along with Dr. Zavajancic and with Mr. Mancusi, to support teachers through meaningful PD, as we believe that we must place a high value on teaching the complexity of our language in all classrooms pre-K-12 to further empower our students to make meaning across varied types of text. Tonight, we are going to talk to you a little bit more about the accessing and navigating of text within this continuum of learning progression.
Thank you, Dr. Swingler. Going along with the accessing and navigating text, we thought it important to talk a little bit about some of the research on early literacy learning, especially for our pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students. Those of you who have raised children, worked with children, or seen children read will realize that cracking the code of the English language can sometimes look a little bit different for different students in front of us. Our pre-K and our K students come to us with different vocabularies, different background knowledge. They come to us with different life experiences, different print concepts at home. And this slide really talks about how, three major categories here. So we know from the research at this point that about 40% of our students can read or learn to read or crack that code of reading with little effort or very broad-based instruction. The remaining two categories, that middle one, about 50%, these are approximate numbers, would require a explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction in many of those things that Mr. Cummings talked about at the beginning and that Ms. Holcomb will continue to talk about later on in the presentation, like phonological awareness and phonics instruction. And then finally, there's a subset of students, about 10 to 15%, who do require some specialized instruction, repeated instruction that's also, as the one prior explains, explicit and code-based. The problem with this is that when kids come to us in pre-K and K, they can't be sorted. We don't know which ones will fall in which category. And that's why it's so important that everybody sort of benefits from this treatment of explicit instruction in our programming for early literacy. If we wait until we can identify them, which is in later grades, the gaps will have grown too big, and they're much more difficult to close moving forward in grades 4 and on, or grades 3 and on at that point. This is a simple formula for reading, and again, this is early literacy. Essentially, that the product there, reading proficiency or reading comprehension, is really as a result of listening comprehension, your ability to understand spoken language or language comprehension, and your ability to decode or have word recognition. And again, this goes back to that phonological awareness and that phonics debate I shouldn't say debate, but phonics instruction at this point. Again, students will come to us with varying abilities in both language comprehension and word recognition when they arrive in pre-K and K. It is no small feat for our early teachers in those early grades to teach students how to read. Our brains aren't wired for it. They literally have to rewire the vision and the language pieces there for kids to be able to learn how to decode text. So again, those teachers are really doing not only a service, but it's sort of like, there's an article out there, reading is rocket science. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of instruction, explicit and not, in order to teach a child to read. Finally, you'll see these two words again, language comprehension in red at the top and word recognition in blue at the bottom. We forget as adult skilled readers at the far right there, what it was like to learn how to read, what it was like to, learn sounds, what it was like to say our first words, put sentences together, become fluent in our reading, both silent and spoken, and then learning how to comprehend text, make inferences. You'll see that at the top. So all of these strands contribute to a individual becoming a skilled reader. As it says there, an increasingly strategic and an increasingly automatic reader. And once we learn those skills, we learn them. They're constrained skills, the ones at the bottom where it says word recognition, decoding, for example, and we sort of take for granted how we got to that position. When you guys look at your pages in front of you, the words are just there. You recognize them, you know them, you can say them. They all become sight words at some point. For early literacy, that's not the case. And teachers do have to instruct in that case to get to the point of skilled reading, where students are doing things like inferring, comprehending, predicting, and all of those upper level skills that we want all of our students to do. It also, remember, goes from reading to learn different things in our content areas in all of our grades through K through 12. And then finally, to Mr. Cummings' point earlier, none of this can be done in isolation. So as Mr. Mancusi talks about the Early Literacy Academy, there are tenets of that have to be spread across the continuum from tier 1 instruction all the way to our most specialized instruction. And it always has to be informed by data. You'll see the overlap in this graphic, that there's core instruction and differentiated practice and intervention all work together in order to form our readers in our schools. Thank you.
Okay, so can you hear me? Okay, good, thank you. We've heard all about language acquisition, how difficult, how much is involved here. I'm taking us back out to think about reading is thinking, is meaning making. Thank you. I would like to focus in on a couple of these pieces and then go to that solving words piece, which is what we'll really be diving into tonight. So we think within text. In that area, we're talking about, we're looking at the words more. We're thinking about solving words. We're working on our fluency. We might be summarizing. So we're working within the text. The next piece of that is thinking beyond the text. That's when we start to infer. We bring our background knowledge in. We work on synthesizing, predicting. Then we've got the thinking about the text, and that's our higher level work where we're analyzing author's craft. We're thinking about author's purpose. We're critiquing. We're evaluating ideas within a text. So that's the huge picture. And then when we go back to thinking within the text, let's take out that solving words part, which is so important, especially in early literacy. And that's where we're bringing in our work on phonological awareness, which is all about the sounds in language. So before we ever get to letters matching sounds, we need to help kids understand the sounds that they hear in sentences, rhyme, sounds they hear within a word. And then we get down to the phonemes, the individual sounds within a word. So we have to work on that phonological work and the phonemic work before and alongside our phonics work, where we bring in our letters and the sounds, how letters are combined to make different sounds, and we study that together. Along with this, in the solving words piece, we're diving into vocabulary, even in the early literacy times, where we might be saying, we're adding an ending to a word. Well, if we add ing to a word, that changes the meaning of the word. So we're starting at the very beginning of our vocabulary instruction here. So to that point, you supported me, thank you very much, in bringing in the units of study in phonics. We purchased them last year, and then we started to implement them in the fall of this year. Not the most ideal time to bring in a new set of lessons and curriculum, but we figured it was crucial enough to get started, and we've had lots of support along the way, which I appreciate. We started our professional learning work in August through remote lessons or sessions with our K-1 teachers, where we introduced the units of study in phonics. We talked about the scope and sequence, how the lessons might go, and why they're set up the way they are. We had a staff developer work 3 different days with our language arts specialists so they could work as coaches in the buildings as much as possible, usually remotely, working with groups of teachers, K-1 teachers, to implement the phonics units of study. One of the best parts, I feel, was that we were able to purchase a set of the recorded phonics lessons that were actually developed and recorded by the people who wrote the lessons in the units of study in phonics. So during that asynchronous word work time, during the hybrid model, teachers would post those lessons during the word work time so kids would watch them at home, and then the teachers would reinforce that skill in class the next day or the next time the child was in school. What I loved about that is parents got to see, they got to peek into what these units are like, why we're teaching what we're teaching, and I'm really hoping we'll hear a lot from parents over the next few months about the lessons and what kids are learning through the phonics units of study. So the next slide, Zakia, thank you, talks about the instructional components of the units of study in phonics. We start with 20 minutes of targeted work daily for all students. This is a whole class lesson that we do. In the future, we'll have our students working on the rugs, you know, with friends, with partners, with the manipulated, the letters and sounds and whiteboards. Right now, students are working at their desks individually. But there is a direct instruction that concentrates on sounds, letter patterns, spelling patterns, vocabulary work. And then we move to targeted instruction with small groups of students or individuals who need more intensive, more frequent small group work as needed. The key piece to all of this, in my mind, and I hope in all of ours, is that we want these skills that are learned in the phonics units of study to be transferred into real reading and real writing opportunities. When students are learning these skills, they need to be able to use them and apply them right away in reading and writing. So an overarching goal of the phonics units of study is to strengthen that transfer piece. So you'll notice if you get a chance to see some of these lessons, you'll notice that there is a direct activity that the children need to do with their own reading or writing. So maybe during the lesson, they'll be asked to take out one of the books that they're reading in their reading baggie and to apply, you know, look for two consonants together that make one sound, or look for a blend, you know, not a digraph. Look for two vowels and what sound they make. Look for endings in words. And then the same thing will happen in writing, which is really important too, because that's where we're really applying our skills as well, not just in our reading. So take out your piece of writing. See what you can do about sounds that you hear inside words. Let's stretch out that word and see what sounds you can hear in the middle and what skills we've been learning and how we can apply them. So that's a huge piece of the work that we're trying to do in our phonics. Sorry.
So just to reemphasize and revisit what Dr. Zavajancic spoke of earlier, we believe in a continuum of support for readers through our SRBI process and also in the realm of specialized instruction. Again, Tier 1 instruction with classroom core teacher within the units of study work where students are receiving direct instruction using the phonics units of study. As needed, students are further supported in Tier 2 or Tier 3 work. That includes targeted strategy groups on discrete skills, perhaps pre-teaching or reteaching of core lesson material and key concepts, are also engaging in authentic word work aligned to the text work that is done in guided reading, or through a conference within their writing work in order to support them to apply that thinking in their authentic work. Additionally, we recognize and acknowledge that our students may have additional needs and might need to receive ongoing instruction through a specialized approach. Mr. Mancusi will speak to this more as he outlines some of the work of the Early Literacy Academy. Please note that throughout our SRBI processes, staff is student-centric, while progress monitoring how kids are doing within the key concepts outlined within the units of study and the standards. Our learning targets are adjusted as our goal is to continually support all students to reach their individual needs and to accelerate their thinking in the realm of literacy. We always want to be sure that our intervention is appropriate to what the child is showing us in order to strengthen those core literacy skills. One question that Lynn and I continue to come back to along with the other leaders in the system is how do we continue to strengthen our process? We continue to ask ourselves pre-K-12, how do we continue to grow the capacity of our classroom teachers, LASs, special education teachers, to become stronger diagnosticians, to recognize as early as possible when students show they have additional needs. Lynn and I had developed some professional learning modules for pre-K-12 teachers that we again had hoped to start in alignment with the work of the phonics program in the fall of 2020, but COVID had other plans. So in respect to our teachers, we are continuing to evolve those modules, and we plan to revisit this during the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you very much. Rob Mancusi, Executive Director of Special Education and Special Programs. That previous slide prior to this one fits in really nicely about Dr. Gillis will speak to about the coursework or the PD that is part of the Early Literacy Academy, and then the courses that are part of that. So the Early Literacy Academy, as you're aware, we discussed this during the budget. The purpose of it is there's a dual purpose. It's to meet the literacy needs of our most at-risk students with disabilities within the Fairfield Public Schools. You'll notice on this slide, I did not mention students who are eligible for special education under the specific learning disabilities / dyslexia primary disability category, because during the budget presentation, I remember very vividly, Mrs. Ratelli made a comment that may exclude some students with significant reading disabilities who may not be diagnosed with dyslexia yet, or who may be excluded from as an appropriate candidate for the Early Literacy Academy. So that is a change I just wanted to highlight. And the second purpose is to increase internal instructional capacity to meet the structured literacy needs of all readers at the tier 1, 2, 3 level, as well as specialized instruction for students with significant reading disabilities. The initial Early Literacy Academy student cohort is going to be 7 of our most at-risk students with disabilities in grades 1 through 3. And the location is going to be at one elementary school. Again, during the board presentation of the budget, I think Mrs. Maxon Canelli and Mrs. Ratelli and I think Mrs. Pitko expressed some concerns with the split day off-site and then going back to the different schools for young children. That transition might pose a challenge that we wanted to consider, and I think it made a lot of sense. That's why you'll see that revision in that. The staffing model, if we can go to the next one, the staffing model for the Early Literacy Academy will be 1 special education teacher, 2 literacy paras, and then a literacy coach / mentor that will be provided by Literacy How 1 day per week. The literacy coach and mentor will support and coach teachers in the implementation of the elements and principles of structured literacy, which Dr. Gillis will go into more deeply in her slides, and to provide special education teachers with effective intervention methods and knowledge to set reasonable goals and expectations for students at various stages of the reading and writing process. The literacy coach and mentor will also, in addition to coaching the students in the Early Literacy Academy, will facilitate 2 30-hour structured literacy courses for up to 30 special education and regular education teachers to increase the quality of literacy instruction at the tier 1, 2, and 3 levels, as well as specialized instruction for students who have IEPs. And as I said, the literacy coach will be a staff member contracted through Literacy How. Dr. Gillis is on the call. She will go into more detail about the specifics of what structured literacy is, and talk about it relative to providing students with disabilities support, as well as the PD for improving the quality of Tier 1 intervention or Tier 1 instruction. So Dr. Gillis, if you're available to review your slides, I'd appreciate it. Are you there?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Do I need to talk louder, or can you hear me okay?
No, we can hear you just fine, thank you.
Great.
So
I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for inviting me. Thanks, Rob, for introducing
the concept to the board, and I want to thank the Board of Ed members and Rob and James and Lynn and Jen. I was able to listen to most of your presentation. I wish I could be there in person, maybe another time. So I'll go ahead and just introduce myself. I'm president and founder of Literacy How. I also am a research affiliate at Haskins Laboratories, where I started working in 2000. I can't believe 21 years ago, doing the work that I continue to do now, which is to provide embedded professional development to teachers, mostly in the state of Connecticut. I have a team of 10 people that work with me, and we're very honored to do the work that we do. And so tonight I'm just going to talk a little bit about structured literacy, and I won't spend a lot of time because I know people will have questions. But first I want to just explain what is structured literacy. Simply, it's teaching the elements of language, hence its name structure, and I'm going to describe what I mean by that in a minute. But teaching what the structure of, in this case, the English language is, and then also incorporating key principles of instruction that ensure students learn how our language actually works. And so when I talk about the structure of language, just to a little bit of explanation, every written language has a structure, and that structure includes at least two components. It's actually more than this, but for the sake of this discussion, it includes the phonology of the language, that is the sounds that are used to say words, and every language, every spoken language has a phonology, and it's unique to that particular language. And then every written language has an orthography, which is just simply how the words are written, how they're spelled, the sequence of those patterns. English is based on an alphabet, like lots of languages, including Spanish, French, German, Hebrew. Many languages are alphabetic. There are other languages like Chinese that are based on pictures, and Japanese is based on a syllabary. So not all languages are alphabetic, but our language happens to be based on characters called alphabet. Some alphabetic languages are easy to learn to read and write, and an example of that is Spanish, because you have 26 letters, or maybe there's 25 letters. I don't speak Spanish, but there are the exact number of letters as there are sounds, and therefore we call that language transparent. It's pretty easy to figure out, and it's fairly easy once you learn what the sound symbol associations are. It's pretty easy to learn that language. English, on the other hand, is very difficult, one of the most difficult alphabetic languages, actually, because not only is English based on sounds, and by the way, we have more sounds than we have letters in English, so that's one aspect of what makes it challenging and complex, but we also have a language that's based on meaning. And so we have to really understand as teachers how to explain irregularities. For example, if I say to you, what sounds do you hear in the word health? And I asked you to take that word apart sound by sound, you would say the sound H for H, and the sound E for E, and the sound O for L, and the sound S for TH. If I asked you to spell that word, most of you would spell it with an A. Why is there an A when I only hear eh, right? Well, the reason is not just because English is a little challenging, it's because health has the root word heal in it. And if we know that, we actually have a really important bit of information about the word health and what it means and its relationship to heal. So again, English, the point of this is that in order to teach English well and help children understand how to pronounce the words, how to spell the words, what those words mean, what the different contexts are for meaning, we really have to help children understand this complex structure of English. So those are some of the elements. There's other elements like the syntax of a language, the semantics or the meaning of a language, but that's really at the heart of structured literacy, is teaching all those structures so that children can learn to read and write the language and become proficient in both aspects of reading and writing and being proficient. The other part of structured literacy is teaching principles of good pedagogical principles, and I've listed some of those here. So teaching something explicitly, which just means teaching it directly, being systematic, which means following a sequence, going from simple to complex, cumulative, meaning you add information as you go to get to mastery. Diagnostic is we're using data to inform what we're doing, and we're digging deep so that we can understand what's driving any challenges a student might have. And prescriptive, just meaning providing some scaffolds to support students who need more targeted instruction based on their individual needs, and knowing how to monitor what those needs are. So just a couple of questions I put here. Does every student need to know the structure of the English language? In my humble opinion, the answer is yes. But the difference is that some children, and James talked about the levels of, children who seem to learn to read and come into the world almost knowing how to do that, and then the other end of the spectrum, children who really need a great amount of explicit instruction and lots of repetitions because of a language-based learning disability. But all children really need to know that to become proficient readers and writers. And so we just have to know which ones will figure it out and need a minimal amount, which kids need a modest amount, which kids need, more. And I'll elaborate on that a bit on the next slide. The other question I posed here is, how do we know which students need the direct instruction in the structure of the English language? And simple way is really through what we call SRBI or RTI. It's basically, if you're teaching those foundational skills in the early grades, in pre-K, ideally, but once kids go to school, and receive formal instruction in kindergarten and first grade, those students who are taught foundational skills and taught using a scope and sequence and taught, through that scope and sequence to mastery and are figuring it out, if they learn those skills, they're great, they're good to go, and you can really start focusing more heavily on the comprehension and the higher order thinking skills that Jen and Lynn talked more about earlier. But for those who don't learn those skills, we know that those students are going to need an extra dose or tier of instruction. So in the next slide, I've kind of outlined what would structured literacy look like in the different tiers. So in tier 1, otherwise known as general education, we know we have to start with a universal screener. We have to identify students who are at risk for reading failure. And even, within that framework, we know now that all children need to know basic foundational skills, and that the best way to give and deliver that instruction is in small differentiated groups, whether the target is on phonemic awareness or teaching phonics or spelling. That instruction is something that would be delivered for all students in the general education curriculum. And associated with that would be professional development that all teachers would learn about in order to teach those skills in those small groups, and receiving some coaching support to know what that looks like. For tier 2, where we're looking at reading interventions for students that need something in addition to the general education curriculum, we're going to need to go a little deeper and administer diagnostic measures to determine, well, what should the instructional focus be for those students? And then we're going to want to monitor progress regularly for those students, because we want to know right away, is this working or is it not, and what are the adjustments that we need to make based on those data. So again, students who are not meeting the goals receive more intensive instruction based on that structure of language. And I didn't go into all the elements in the interest of time, but there are, 6 elements associated with the structure of language that some students need more or less of that we would determine through these diagnostic assessments. And as you can imagine, the students that are in those Tier 2 interventions, those teachers are going to need more focused coaching support because the students are going to require a higher level of knowledge on the teacher's part. And then the last tier, which is often associated with special education, we're going to administer those same diagnostic assessments. We're going to monitor progress more frequently because those students, we don't have a minute to waste with them. We need to really know exactly where they're struggling and where to focus our intentional instruction. And then for instruction, again, using their IEPs to focus the instruction on their goals and objectives. And again, for professional development, giving those special education teachers the highest level of support to be able to focus their instruction on the students who are struggling the most. So on that note, I hope I did that in the time period I was given, and happy to take any questions that anyone might have at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Gillis.
You're most welcome.
We're available to take any questions any of the board members may have.
Does anybody have? Oh. Thank you. Take it to the board for any questions. Oh.
If
We
we
can
could
start
start
with
with
Dr.
Dr.
Gillis. Does it matter
Gillis'
to you?
questions, that would be appreciated.
Mrs. Maxinelli?
One question through the chair to Dr. Gillis, I was hoping you could explain, is that in providing the professional development support for our general education teachers especially, do you make a real point of differentiating the methodology they had been using prior to bringing in this whole phonics instruction? And actually, I'm not sure if this would be to Dr. Gillis or to our staff, but in terms of differentiating the past method that our general education teachers were using versus what we are moving to, because talk about something which now will have become habit and which we are very consciously looking to move away from. And I was wondering, to what degree is that explicit teaching a part of our professional development? And is that something that will be
for me?
Well, that's honestly, I think it's kind of to both. I mean, at what part is it part of what Literacy How will be doing with our staff, and to what degree is it just something we're focused on internally?
So I'll let Dr. Gillis begin with the differentiation between the special education professional development and the general ed, if that's okay.
Dr. Gillis, do you want to
Sure.
take that?
Well, for the near term, I think, and again, this is, conversation that I'm sure will be ongoing, but for the near term and the work that I've been asked to submit a proposal for is really around the Early Literacy Academy and setting that up and supporting special ed teachers through coaching. But bigger picture, I think the expectation is to bring alignment across the tiers of instruction. And I guess what I mean by that is, as I mentioned earlier, structured literacy is good pedagogy, good reading instruction that all children benefit from, but some don't need as much of as others, right? So all teachers need to understand, what does that mean? And I have to say that in the 21 years that I've been doing this work, I hear very frequently teachers say, I never learned this. I didn't know this. I didn't know how the structure of language worked. I didn't learn this in my higher ed teacher prep program, and I didn't learn it as a child, as a student. And we hear this over and over again. So how can you teach a child if you don't know it yourself, right? And so what we do as coaches and the support that we provide, you know, especially in Tier 1, because that is the first line of defense for all of our students, right, is to ensure that when a child is struggling, especially with the decoding skills and word recognition skills that James talked about, right, and the simple view and then looking at Scarborough's rope, is we have to be able to explain things to children. And if we as teachers don't understand it ourselves, then that's something we have to teach the teachers about. And it's done in a very, I don't know how best to explain it. It's done in very practical ways, but at the same time, we try to find the balance between explaining some of the theory behind it, including how the brain learns to read and why that those foundational skills are so critical in the early years. And then we just bring teachers along and meet them where they are, so that if there are some methods that they've been using that are not based on evidence and the science, that gradually those methods, you know, are not used anymore because they're not as effective as, you know, the methods that are based on the science of reading. I don't know if that answers your question, but it is, you know, a process that is just collaborative, involving, you know, leaders in the school and teachers, and just everyone sort of being committed to doing what's best for children based on data that is important to look at analytically.
The only thing I'll add there, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Holcomb and Dr. Swingler, is that this will obviously be more than just a coaching through Literacy How. We need a systems approach to Ms. Maxon-Kennelly's point of the professional development, which is what Lynn and Jen are working on, and this will include principals learning, as well as our LAS team and how they integrate with this, as well as our teachers. And Lynn and Jen, I don't know if you want to add anything to your work in the next year. I know you began mentioning about how this year sort of changed some of our practices, but what that will look like in the years to come.
Yeah, I think what's most important is that we have to have a common language. We have to make sure that everyone understands the importance of this work in phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and phonics instruction. I think by now, I would say that most teachers understand that it's a crucial piece of our instruction. I don't know if it was always that way in education, and I know we've learned a lot over the past, say, 10 years. But I do see the need for just coming together as a community of teachers and our LASs, our special ed teachers, and making sure that we are using the same terms with kids, that we're not confusing them when we say, the silent E or the bossy this, or the, that we have to be really consistent with our instruction. And part of that is our job in our professional development. We've taken those two texts that we want to start with our LASs first, the ILA text and then also the Kilpatrick text, to kind of talk about all the different aspects of this kind of teaching in the classroom and with the language arts specialists to make sure that we have a consistent message across the district. I hope I haven't repeated that too much, but that's our biggest push, that we have to make sure teachers understand the importance of this. All teachers. Right now I'm teaching some sessions for the teachers who have to take the Foundations of Reading survey coming up in the next couple of weeks, and I have 40 participants. Now, I really don't think it's just because of the reading survey. I think the majority of those teachers are asking great questions and they want to know more. So we have our phonics units of study that have a component of professional development already embedded in that, and then I have the LASs learning alongside them, along with the course that we're trying to teach. Do you want to talk about the course a little bit more? You're okay? Anything else I should add?
The only other thing, oh, sorry, Ms. Maxinelli. Only other thing I will add, Ms. Holcomb and Dr. Swingler's work will be simultaneously done with our curriculum review process as well. So the PD and in the upcoming years, looking at what our current curriculum is and bringing obviously in front of the board for a curriculum review as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it's obvious to you, but hopefully it's obvious to everyone. I mean, you started the entire presentation by pointing out the most vital skill inherent in the whole notion of literacy. So to answer your point, no, you can't say the word consistent too many times. I mean, this is going to need to be really followed up on by all our administrators and all our support and all of our collaborative teams, because this truly needs to be a common language. Or you will leave kids behind. I mean, so no, I don't think you could say that word consistent too many times. This is a bear that you are taking on here, and for which this district is going to be so much richer that we are doing this. So I don't know how much longer I'll be around following Fairfield Public Schools and everything, but this is going to be something that's going to take years to unfold, and it's truly a long-term investment. And so in that vein, I'll get kind of a more targeted question to our FPS staff is, what are you doing to explain to staff what it is that you are moving them away from? Because the moment they start feeling uncomfortable with the new, they're going to fall back on the old, and there is reason to not do that beyond the consistent argument. And so without undercutting what they have been doing some for years, what kind of support are you offering in terms of explaining the move?
One of the, we started the work in the SRBI meetings. So we're asking LASs and teachers to bring student work. So it's one thing to look at scores, star scores or core scores, but we want to see the pieces of writing. We want to see running records to say, what are the children doing? What do they seem to have difficulty with? Now, I've been able to be in some of those SRBI meetings or work with the LASs prior to the SRBI meetings to say, these are some of the questions we need to be asking. So if we're noticing that students are writing, say kindergartners are writing sounds, the ending sounds before beginning sounds, which can happen, right? So we need to identify that quickly and to be able to correct that. So those are some of the questions I'll be talking to the LASs about, or have been, or classroom teachers. I've been meeting with some teams of teachers as well to say, what are we noticing? Here's what students need to do first. This is what students need to do next, and how are we teaching along those lines? So if I'm explaining it correctly, it's about the professional learning that our language arts specialists are doing as coaches, and then through the SRBI process, and myself. Does that help?
Let me clarify my question, because I think the issue that I'm talking about is something that is not going to become readily apparent until middle school, when pictures are removed, when this whole notion of relying solely on context clues starts blowing up in the faces of kids who had been coasting. That's what so this is something that a K or first or second grade teacher might not even be aware. It's something we want to consciously move away from, but we're not leaving you alone. We are providing what is going to fill the void and the new method going forward. So that's more what I'm kind of getting at, is making teachers understand why the status quo is being changed, because I think they need to know that.
I agree with you, Mrs. Maxim Kennelly, and Ms. Holcomb and I's conversation. We know that an essential part of this is partnering with our building level leadership. So as we're continuing to think about, as our practices change and we start to see the change in student achievement, because that's where the proof is in that pudding, right? So when we see this directly impacting the literacy lives of our kids, and we can notice and celebrate and elevate that through our building level work, we are going to be able to affirm why the change is necessary. To your point, I think part of where you are is there are some deep-seated belief systems around reading and the way that reading needs to be taught, right? And that is a deep, passionate pedagogy. I mean, that's what so many of us are dedicating our lives to. right? So there's a part of me, and Lynn and I have spoken about this further, that, you know, the work of Mrs. Gillis, Dr. Gillis, so super important to start thinking about that K-1-2 work. If we don't extend that pre-K-12, we are missing the opportunity, as you have said. So this needs to continue through our work, 3, 4, 5, then working within remediation and intervention support in middle school and also in high school to start to further articulate what is it that we're doing and why is it working for kids. Once we start seeing that impact, we can start to take a step back perhaps from some of our other processes that we have in place, because I will tell you, all of our teachers will say the one thing they don't have enough of, as always, is time. So if we see the impact of what's happening, let's celebrate that, let's elevate it through the SRBI process, and let's share that thinking in our buildings and work in collaboration with our building leadership to make that happen.
Okay, I think I got the answer to my question, but I'll just keep coming back to it. I just had one, I have several other questions, but I just wanted to ask one more question to Dr. Gillis, if we're trying to prioritize those, and then I'll cede, or?
Do you have a follow-up? Can she, go ahead, Ms. Picco, for a follow-up.
To a parent that's home, we're talking about a lot of stuff that maybe they don't understand, and I am very new to teaching my child how to read and actually taking the Foundations of Reading test in April. Are we currently in the district, and I apologize if I should know this answer, are we currently using Readers Writers Workshop in elementary school? I've done a lot of homework for my classes right now on Dr. Gillis's approach, which is far superior, and I'm just curious how that's going to look to a parent now of a first, second, third grader when they're seeing this change.
Well, I think, do you want to talk? No, sorry. When we have to think about what you're defining as reading writing workshop, in our district, our reading writing workshop means we teach a whole class lesson for a short period of time. The students go out to work independently while the teacher works in small groups, and then they come back together for a share. That's a workshop model. There is a lot of information out there about, you know, workshop isn't working, but actually workshop, the way we're doing it, and I think most districts in our DERG and in DERG 1, I don't know if they still called them DERGs, but use a workshop model. And it's because it incorporates whole class, small group, individual, gradual release of responsibility, and targeted instruction. When you hear that workshop doesn't work, it's really much more about how it's being implemented, because guided reading or small group instruction, individual conferring, keeping the mini lessons short and targeting instruction beyond the whole class, all of that is part of best practice. It's how people, you know, good ideas gone bad sometimes, right? So somebody might have a workshop where students are kind of wallowing in independent reading and teachers are not working in small groups and not conferring. That's not good for anyone, right? So it could be a writing workshop where students are told everybody must write about this, and then the teacher's not conferring and students are left on their own to not practice the foundational skills they need to. Or they're never taught to or emphasized to revise and edit. Editing is a huge piece of our writing. We need to be able to communicate so that other people can read, or what we've written, right? So I think I'd caution you there's a lot of hype right now around workshop, and I'd love to talk to you more about it. There's so much more to it, and you have to think about this district alone. I was here 20 years ago as a teacher. We started a workshop model 20 years ago in Fairfield. There are a lot of good things going on in our classrooms that would be considered workshop. There's a mini lesson, there's the small group instruction, and partner work, and independent work, independent reading, independent writing. Can we get better? Absolutely. But there are an awful lot of positives that I just want you to know that it's not all bad. And yeah, I don't understand a lot of the hype against workshop. The alternative would be a program. And I don't know if that's really what you'd want either. So we could talk, and I'd love to help you with the foundations if you want to.
I just want to follow up on Ms. Holcomb's response, because there's a couple things that we have to be really careful about. One of them being that we fall on, there's a lot of conversation, and I have been doing this. So as you know, I'm in my 35th year. I think in my 30th year, I was teaching 3rd grade, and I was in the whole language and all what that meant. And as long as this has been going on, there's reading wars and this stuff, and it's a very unfortunate construct of that educators have allowed to do this to themselves by getting into a war over reading instruction, when it really needs to be
You're
about
muted.
what.
You're being asked to unmute yourself. To unmute, press *6.
I won't take it as a sign. But when we pick sides in a war, nobody, stating the obvious, nobody wins. Really, what I hear Ms. Holcomb speaking to, and I believe is what the district has to do is do what's right by kids, and kids need different answers. If you go back to, I think it's the second slide in the presentation tonight, and Dr. Savichanza gave the percents, which is rooted in research, that 40% of the kids got it, another 40%, 50% needs specific instruction, and 10% are going to need additional explicit instruction in order to accomplish this, right? That's not about which side they're getting at. That's about the program that they need, and strike that word, the instruction that they get targeted to their learning needs. The other major failing of a school system when they go to implement this type of work, and I think this speaks to some degree to Ms. Maxon-Kennelly's question, is an inability or a failure to execute it year after year after year. Like, you have to stay on this. So, you can't be that we're going to do reading for 3 years and then we're going to turn our attention to something else. Because you have continual turnover of staff, for one thing. You've got continually evolution of practice on another. So as teachers are doing this, they're getting better at it, but they need to be continually challenged at it, because they're going to have more questions the better they get at it. So when a district loses its focus on reading instruction as a whole pre-K-12, and particularly early literacy instruction, they're going to lose their way. And teachers are going to come along, and they're going to get lost, and they're going to kind of fall back on the way that they were taught, or they're going to pick up bad advice from a colleague or from somebody else, and then you have the dissolution of the framework. You've got a system that falls apart. So those two things, getting caught up on one side of the war or another, and then not following through and committing to a long-term, deep professional learning model that builds capacity time after time and builds both a horizontal alignment and a vertical alignment. Those are the hallmarks of a good school system, no matter what happens. So the district has done many things over the years, but they've not remained consistent and strong. And as Ms. Holcomb said, I think this is part of further conversations we have to have in the district. Ms. Holcomb, I know, has reached out to work with parents who have concerns about the workshop model. And we'll continue to work with the community and our teachers to build an approach that centers on what's right for kids, but also has the staying power to support the teachers through the years to come. It's always got to remain a major priority, of both our professional learning time and our budgeting.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, you had a question for Dr. Gillis?
I had one more question specifically for Dr. Gillis, and then a few others for staff, but I can wait to give other people a turn. My question through the chair to Dr. Gillis was regarding the chart with the structured literacy across the tiers. And does Literacy How have a way of identifying perhaps earlier than we are currently able in terms of any type of universal screenings to know sooner in kindergarten that we have a student whose needs we should be addressing and not waiting much longer? Because obviously, truly, when it comes to this type of language acquisition, learning the structure, the sooner we identify it, the better. And I was wondering, how young does Literacy How empower its staff to be able to identify it with your screenings?
I mean, we actually have worked with preschool teachers with early screeners. So, I mean, we know how to find kids who are at risk. And we don't advocate identifying them necessarily, other than they're at risk because of these indicators. But the science is there, and kindergarten teachers absolutely should know what to look for. And if you use the right universal screening assessment tools, and there are many to choose from, you can identify who those students are early, and you can start applying good intervention strategies with them without identifying with them necessarily, without putting a label on them, without doing anything except giving them more of focused instruction based on the data.
Right, and obviously I agree with not labeling them. On the other hand, I also agree that let's not have teachers learn the hard way. So, so to that point, to Dr. Zavajancic, is this something that is part of this, or is that a phase 2, phase 3 that we'd be looking at?
We are happy to collaborate with Mr. Mancusi's department as a general ed group, and within the review, we are going to be looking at assessments as well, in terms of how that integrates with our curriculum, what it looks like for teachers, and what the PD is, because again, it has to happen in the classroom. Teachers have to know what to look for, and what those markers are, or those flags are, within our assessments. Dr. Gillis talked about a host of them. We have some of them that we currently use in our schools, but the bigger question, I guess, is what do we do after we know that information, and what is the teacher's response when they have that information right in front of them of how they change trajectories for that child.
Any other? Does anybody else have a question? Well, let's switch it up. Let's go to the side.
Okay. I've got some macro and some micro questions. So I don't know which one is better to start with, but
Ms. Jacobson, can I just ask you, do you have questions for Dr. Gillis?
I do not.
Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Gillis? Dr. Gillis, I think that we are, is it okay if we, Dr. Gillis, thank you for joining us tonight. The board doesn't have any further questions. We may call on you, and again, just by email if anything comes up after this meeting, but I thank you for taking the time tonight, for joining us, and for your work and support as we move this initiative forward. So you,
you're very welcome, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for trusting in my work, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
You as well. Bye.
Bye. Ms. Jacobson.
So first, just thank you for the presentation to begin with. My first question is, we are identified in this presentation to be looking to train 30 general ed and special ed educators, correct? And I'm just wondering what the selection criteria is around those 30, and is it spread throughout different schools? Is it just the grades 1, 2, 3 who are going to be implementing this? So just who are we going to be providing this to?
We're looking right now. Obviously, it's going to be the staff who's going to be working with our students. So, and then the additional staffs, we're looking at starting with kindergarten teachers. And then if there's room, first grade. But there has been a talk of a coordinated plan. But yeah, we would start likely with kindergarten teachers.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I'm just wondering, again, at the macro level, this is obviously starting as more of a tier 3, right? But the goal, yes, right?
The Early Literacy Academy, yes. That would be for students who already have IEPs. The professional development part is where, we would start with, we've been talking about starting potentially with kindergarten, regular ed staff, with special ed staff as well on the courses.
What I'm understanding is that we're looking to scale this up, right, over time.
Yes, we started small this year on this. We wanted to really focus, so we wanted to be successful. But as Mr. Cummings said, this is a year after year after year effort.
Right, and that's what I'm getting at. Do we have the actual articulation of that year after year after year on paper at this point in terms of going forward? Maybe it's part of the district improvement plan, maybe that's something to come and we don't have it yet, but what I'm piggybacking off of also to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly's question is, to make that happen, it has to be on paper somewhere, right? So we have an implementation plan going forward to the scalability that we're looking to address from this micro that we're starting with to the macro goal, correct? And then,
Yes.
thank you. Now we've kind of switched gears a little bit, because when we were talking about this during the budget, it was going to be half day at Giant Steps and then half back at your home school. So now this is kind of mirroring what we had with Math Academy. It's going to be housed at one elementary school. And are these 7 students that we're starting out with staying at that one elementary school all day now, meaning they are going to, unless that is their home school to begin with, they would be leaving their home school?
Yes, they would stay there all day.
Okay. And then it's grades 1, 2, 3, 7 kids. So this is a mixed age classroom then?
When they got their individual intensive structured literacy support, it would potentially be one-on-one or small group based on the identified needs of the students.
Okay, but this is taking place in a general ed classroom, right? I mean, this is...
The first part of the day it's like a resource setting. And then after the part of the day would be in a resource setting with the students and the teacher and the literacy paras and the coach once a week. And then they would go out later in the day, and then the staff would follow them.
Okay. So as we look to the scalability, do we have any idea of how long it's going to take before we have everyone trained that we want to have trained in meeting all of the students, the full pool of population, which we know is much greater than 7, where this would actually be embedded and able to be rolled into each of our elementary? Is that even the goal?
You're asking excellent questions. Thank you. We are in conversation about how this could potentially be a larger scale plan. We've been talking already on like a multi-year.
Let me jump on that though. I think that the goal is starting with kindergarten next year and then with ensuing grades is to build the capacity. I'm going to approach this in a couple of different ways. One would be to improve the capacity of all classroom teachers to have a better understanding of what they're seeing, how to identify it at an early age, and how to intervene successfully. They themselves, the classroom teachers, are not necessarily going to be the interventionists, but in their core classroom work, they have to support the work of the interventionists. So the classroom teachers, the special education teachers that work with early literacy or early age groups, primary grades, as well as the LASs. One of the things we've talked about is it's going to be critical in our training that it's one thing to train the kindergarten teachers to recognize concerns, and Dr. Gillis spoke about the assessments that we might be able to use to identify those concerns. But if we only train one half of the equation, in other words, the person who identifies, and we don't train the persons or people who that person then goes to, then we're not fixing the problem. Because if I understand the problem and I take it to other people who then need to elevate it, and they don't get it, they don't have the same training, it's not going to move forward. So building principals, the LAS team, the EPF at the elementary. These are all people who are involved in the SRBI process. They're going to be critical to supporting the teacher and the student in identifying the next steps. Our goal would be, you know, you're asking a question kind of about timeline. I'm hesitant to answer that yet because it really, the approach we're taking next year is to identify, to learn, to identify and learn from what this works with this particular group. Our hope would be that in the ensuing years, we build capacity in first, second, third grade. We'd also have to build a corresponding course for new hires, new staff, so that they're getting trained and brought up to speed. But that would essentially be the goal, around a 4-year goal to identify primary grades to support the teachers, a support system that exists beyond that, and then determine exactly how many students can we successfully begin to remediate, and then what are the number of students that we continue to struggle with, and how do we continue to learn from that? So I'm hoping for a long-term relationship here that deepens our understanding of what we need to do in order to support students and our staff moving forward.
Have you identified the elementary school yet? Did you foresee this happening?
No, not yet. We've had a couple conversations, but we haven't moved to that level yet.
Okay. Anyone else before I give it back to Mrs. Maxicanelli? Mrs. Maxicanelli?
Okay, so I consolidated them on one sheet. So 3 questions left. First of all, I was curious, as we look at this language comprehension, you know, on that, I love the entwined strings. I was wondering, does the science support where in there is the root of the achievement gap? I mean, I immediately noticed the prior, you know, the background knowledge and prior knowledge is probably being a significant component, but there's no, and that was kind of the root of my question about asking about how early we can do these screenings, because the student who starts kindergarten a full year back in terms of vocabulary acquisition, we know right there who our future achievement gap student is. So that's why I'm curious if that's factoring into this conversation as well.
Most certainly factoring in terms of the research question, I think it's a little bit of all of those strands there. So you bring up background knowledge, for example. I'm sure everybody here has heard of, you know, the study on the million word gap that, you know, kids who come from certain homes arrive at school herring and perhaps being able to use more vocabulary, to your point, when they get to pre-K and kindergarten. So I can't pinpoint one of those 8 or 9 pieces that are on the slide there. That is the one factor that's addressing the achievement gap. I think it's a combination of many. And in one of your prior questions, you brought up an important point as well, that sometimes it doesn't show until we get into content-specific courses, right? So middle and high school, and then you see either a gap grow or you see achievement sometimes decline in some of the content areas, which could be a factor of some of the early things in elementary as well. But I can't point to one thing here, and I think it could be different for every child that presents to us, which is why it's so important for teachers to be able to respond and react to those kids that are in front of them when they have the information at their fingertips.
Okay, thank you. My second question was regarding the asynchronous word work that was done starting this past fall. And I was wondering, because I heard all sorts of stories all over the place in terms of parents who toss their hands up come afternoon time, and it was hard. I mean, the spring was hard for everybody. This year, not necessarily. It was easier in some regards, not in others. And so I was wondering, do we have any sense of what percentage of students participated? As in, like, are there electronic records of that, of if a student did a lesson, that it's recorded that this student did it versus another? So one, do we have the sense of the participation with this? And then secondly, do we have any data regarding to show the impact of these specific lessons?
Do you want to talk about do we have any data about?
So I think what you're asking is how many kids logged in to view the videos, right? So we don't have that data. Ms. Holcomb did bring up the whole idea about transfer of skills and how that works. And I know many of the teachers in our grades who were using the lessons made sure they connected the next day to what that transfer is, or to a review practice of what that video is, just in the event that somebody didn't watch the video or needed more direct, explicit instruction or needed perhaps a double dose of it. But there's no hard numbers that I could give you in terms of percentage of students who actually participated in the video watching.
Okay, so I'm just thinking as we look at our enhancements from the budget point of view, you know, in terms of what this got for us. Now, of course, it could be very different in the fall when it's being done live. So I recognize that. I was just hoping that maybe we'd been able to get something out of this fall's experience with this specific new method.
All of our students do take, and Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, all of them take the STAR, and there is a core assessment for phonics as well that they take that would cast our net pretty wide in terms of students who are either falling behind or who have been able to use those skills.
That's what I was going to just speak to. I've been working in IC and web entry to pull as much of that data as I possibly can. It's just been entered. In the core assessment after STAR literacy, if someone flags on that, we then do the core assessment, or we do it with all kindergarten. So we're doing phonemic segmentation. That's a real indicator of some issues with hearing sounds and words. And I'm trying to pull those subsets now to see where are we. I have the information from last year, so I really want to compare where they were last year to where they are this year. Hopefully I'll be able to gather as much data as possible to be able to see where are we going, how are we doing compared to last year.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question just is that as we're doing this work with K through 1, does it in any way reflect on our actual curriculum? Does it make us rethink the spiraling we're doing or any of the approaches to reading, or do our curriculum documents still work despite this adjustment we're making?
So, you know, there's things that fit in certain places better than others. I know I wasn't here last year, but the group was appreciative of the units of study coming in and how they integrated with the curriculum. Our conversations in the instructional department have been on the review process and how we're going to codify all of this moving forward, so that there is this sequential pattern if there's a gap somewhere, or if the units, for example, are misaligned in one area that we've put in. Of course, this is 10 years ago, right, that the curriculum was identified or approved, I should say, where we might have to change course with that.
Any other questions? Mr. Peterson?
I just have a brief comment, kind of not related to the actual curriculum issue, but just to say, you know, in the process of purchasing the Giant Steps building, we talked a lot with other town bodies about putting additional programs in that space. And I actually was won over by the commentary of several board members, you know, against the split model here. But I would encourage us to, you know, keep the idea of putting additional programs in that space in mind. You know, maybe not this one, but, you know, not to close off the possibility of using that space for, you know, as more purposes, you know, potentially to, you know, for other cost savings or income possibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you for the presentation. Okay, moving on to new business. First reading of comm survey. Dr. Zavajanczyk, you want to introduce this? Or Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you have anything that you want to say before.
Just really briefly, Dr. Zavajanczyk can speak more to the survey itself, but I wanted the board to know that when this issue was first raised, the first person I reached out to was Ms. Mitchell at the health department, who I wanted to make sure that she was on board with this, and she was and is. And she emailed me today, and I just wanted to talk about, read something that she said. She first learned about this at a supervisors conference. A few nurses, this is I'm going to read directly from her, a few nurses from other districts mentioned the very good results they had using the interventions in the study. The results were a decrease in visits to the nurse and subjective reports of less anxiety experienced by students. I thought our school nurses and students could benefit from it, as the number of mental health visits to the office had increased, and the study offered interventions that enable students to get back to class and increase their instructional time. So, you know, again, with Ms. Mitchell's endorsement, we brought this forward, and Dr. Zavachanzik did some research on this, and he can present it to the board for questions.
James Evajancic, Executive Director of Instruction, Curriculum, and Assessment. I have been in talks as well with Ms. Mitchell in the Health Department about this. In your board packet this evening, you have the IRB, or Institutional Review Board, grant application, as well as the study specifics from UConn. I am joined this evening by phone with Dr. Isaac Smith. He's one of the principal investigators in case there are any individual questions about the protocols. Essentially, it's a 5-year plan. It has been approved by the Department of Education. One of the main tenets here is that many times students will, which you probably read already, will leave class and go to the nurse with some symptoms that sometimes are triggered by anxiety and other emotions. And the nurses sometimes are unable to provide the interventions needed on the spot at that point. At this point, as you read in the study, it would be 2 students per year over the next 4 years. The nurse would go through a day of training with the group here and be able to provide the intervention. There's a number of surveys and questionnaires that get filled out, as well as consent forms that the nurse partakes in as part of the study. It is voluntary. And essentially, the study is to determine if cognitive behavioral interventions provided by nurses is effective in reducing anxiety symptoms at this point. Some of the intervention strategies I pulled out here are calming techniques, relaxation strategies, learning about anxiety and what it does physically and emotionally, muscle relaxation, and breathing techniques. And I'll open it up to the floor for questions on this.
Any questions? Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. I have actually surprisingly many questions. I want to begin with something that it's difficult to ignore. This is a terrible presentation. This is a terrible, terrible presentation from a typographical standpoint. It's extremely difficult to follow. I read the whole packet, mostly just because I was driven to do it. There's 25 pages here with only 14 line spaces. It's not broken up in any way that makes it easy for us to learn from and digest. There is a chart in here that is an abomination. And I find this difficult because I think that this is a laudable goal, but a terrible, terrible presentation. And that gave me pause, frankly. But it did make me dive into it as pretty far. One of the things that I was concerned about with this, hearing the recommendation from Jill Mitchell, I think is a big thing for me to think about. I was concerned to see the degree to which these are large interventions. You know, so 3 to 4 evaluations over the course of a year, 2.5 hours each for child and parent. You know, 5 to 6 child evaluations by the school nurse, 5 to 6 times over an 8-week period, 20 or 30 minutes. Those are large interventions. And I understand that it's for, you know, excessive anxiety. I don't know what the correspondence is between the level of time in a nurse. I mean, I know we're trying to reduce visits altogether, but this is really a lot. I was also curious to note that these are either videotaped or audio taped, which I understand from a study standpoint, but I don't understand from an efficacy standpoint in terms of reducing anxiety. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I believe, and we can call on Dr. Isaac in a moment. I believe the videotapes are mainly to make for the researchers to make sure that the protocols were followed as they were taught.
I want to make clear that I completely understand that, but from a standpoint of reducing anxiety for the student, because from our standpoint, reducing anxiety for the student has to be the primary goal.
And if I could I apologize for the presentation. Going through this, this is the document that was submitted both through the university and the State Department of Ed, as you probably saw, and the Federal Department of Ed, and I didn't want to pull out information for you to make you believe that I was taking things out. So I apologize for that on that behalf.
No, and I want to be very clear that I have no animus toward you on this matter, and I do appreciate comprehensive nature of the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, no, again, I just didn't want to hide what the research protocols were, so thank you for that comment. To your other question, I don't know if we want to, if that was sufficient, or if we want to call on Dr. Isaac.
Dr. Isaac?
Yeah, are you all able to hear me?
We can.
Great. Yep, so just to introduce myself briefly, yeah, my name is Dr. Isaac Smith. I'm a postdoctoral fellow and the primary coordinator of the Column study here at UConn Health. And yeah, I'm happy to speak to those points. Yeah, first, as was alluded to, in terms of the structure and the content that was presented to you all, yeah, so in our communication, we had thought that it had been asked to provide sort of our full grant submission that went out to the Department of Education in order to get the funding for the study. And yeah, had we known that it was going to be distributed to the full board, we do have a lot of materials that are a lot more digestible and friendly to the reader in terms of what's being asked of nurses and of families and of students. So yeah, my apologies on that front, and I'm more than happy to share some of those much briefer and more digestible materials with you all. If I could just speak briefly to your second point regarding the sort of intensity or the amount of intervention that's provided. So just to be clear about what it is we are asking nurses and families to do. So the only content that would happen for our study during the course of the school day is those 5 to 6 intervention sessions that are between 15 and 20 minutes each. So those evaluations, as you alluded to, they are relatively in-depth. Those are designed to take place exclusively sort of with the family and our study team outside of the school day, afternoons or evenings or weekends. And then the same would go as well for the nurse training that was alluded to, the day-long training that also happens sort of outside of the school day and outside of the instructional time and doesn't remove any school nurse from any of their normal duties. And so the intensity of the intervention is really just limited to those sort of 5 20-minute sessions that are designed to be implemented quite flexibly. So to not have a student consistently miss the same class, to have a nurse be able to fit them wherever in her day she's able to provide them, and things of that nature. So that's providing the minimum disruption possible to the nurse, to instructional time, to the student, to sort of all parties involved. And then I believe your last point that I can speak to briefly in terms of the recording of the session. So yes, we do ask nurses to conduct audio recordings of their sessions. And the reason that Dr. Zavdancic provided for that was correct, which is essentially that we want to be able to ensure that that nurses are providing each of the 2 interventions sort of as designed, and those are designed for our study team, the psychologists on our staff, to be able to listen to those sessions and provide support to nurses so that they're able to implement the intervention with as much fidelity to our treatment manuals as possible. So I believe that was each of the points that were raised so far. Yeah, if anybody has any follow-ups, I'm more than happy to speak to those too.
Great, thank you. I do have a couple more questions about the study that perhaps you'll be able to answer, sir. A couple of chain ones. One comment that I found in here from the page from the UConn Institutional Review Board, it says that the study has been approved, but the approval for the study expires end of day on October 10th, 2021, meaning that you cannot conduct research after that date unless final approval for continuation has been obtained. Now, elsewhere we're talking about a 4-year course of study, and so I don't know how those things are squared.
Yep, so both of those are correct. Our funding from the Department of Education does run for 4 years. The way that UConn's institutional review board functions is that approvals are granted on an annual basis, and we're required to submit continuation proposals. So they don't grant any approval for longer than a 1-year period, and we're in consistent communication with them, and we update them anytime our study is at all modified. But then we do our big annual update every year, so that would go out in order to be approved annually for the 4 years of the project.
All right, and you don't anticipate any difficulty in obtaining that approval for the extension?
Absolutely not. Yeah, the major hurdle is just the initial approval, which all took place prior to October of 2020.
All right, that's great. Thank you. And then I only have one more question, probably to Dr. Zavjancic, just about timing. Is this like at what point is this for a 21-22 school year? Certainly not this year. I know it says at some point they don't want to start anything before 10 weeks before the end of the year.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The study protocols say if we're within 10 weeks of the end of the year, I believe it goes to the next year. But I do believe the training for the nurse can happen in the interim.
All right. Thank you. If I have any more questions, I'll forward them to you.
Ms. Jacobson.
Hi, just a couple of quick questions as follow-up, and I might have more next time just because it was a lot to digest. The 5 to 6 20-minute sessions during the school day, over how much time is that? Over how much times is that? 5 to 6 times the whole school year?
So those 5 to 6 sessions are designed to be implemented on approximately a weekly basis, so about 20 minutes per week over the course of about 5 weeks.
And that's it, just 1 5-week period per student?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then just in regards to the videotape, how is that transmitted from our nurses to you?
So all of the audio tapes don't contain any identifying information, and that's been verified by our IRB. It gets uploaded to a secure server, and then we download it immediately, so it's not lingering on the server, and then it's stored on secure external hard drives that are kept in a secure location at our research facility in West Hartford.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Cummings. I just want to honestly, it would just make me feel better. Has Nancy taken a look at the data pieces of this in the end?
I don't believe so. Do you know that?
She has not.
Is there any way that we could have her take a purview at that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
I would really appreciate that. And thank you. I might just have more next time. Sorry, I just didn't have time to get to the whole thing at this point.
And if you could forward just the maybe user-friendly abridged version of this, that would be helpful as well. And can you just talk us through quickly, if possible, how this is all going to play out in terms of getting the approval, getting the consent form signed, identifying, who would participate. That might help us as we move forward on this.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm happy to share, to kind of walk you guys through it, and certainly to provide those materials as well. Again, let me apologize for providing you with the entire grant application. That's really not viewed externally typically. So I'll pass those materials along, and then, so just to walk you through what participation in the study would look like. So the first step that happens is to recruit any interested nurses from your district. At this point, we've been in communication with one nurse at Stratfield Elementary, but certainly we would be very enthusiastic about recruiting in other elementary schools throughout your district as well. Any of those nurses who express interest, schedule an informed consent call with us where we're able to walk them through the details of the study and get their permission to participate. And at that point, we would schedule and complete the training process with them. Those trainings currently are taking place virtually. Our hope would be that for the year of 2021 and 2022, that we would be able to conduct them in person over the course of a day-long training. After the nurses are trained, the next step would be for the nurse to identify sort of students who they're frequently seeing in their office who might be presenting with what they believe are symptoms of anxiety, or to be in communication with teachers or other staff in the school in terms of identifying students who might benefit from the intervention. And then the nurse would communicate with the parents of that student and provide us with their contact information. At that point, we're in touch with the family. We conduct a phone screen with them, determine whether they might be interested. And if they are interested and it sounds like they would be a good fit for our study, then we schedule that baseline evaluation with them that we do, again, right now virtually, but hopefully in the future is done in person. Complete the baseline evaluation with them, and then sort of refer them back to the nurse and say, you know, this student has been found eligible. Go ahead and provide those 5 sessions. The nurse provides those 5 sessions to the student. They have the first student they work with, they have a coach, which would be one of the clinical psychologists on our staff, who is there to sort of support them in implementing the intervention, answer any questions they might have, just to kind of make it sort of maximally effective. And then subsequent to their first student, if they're able to sort of provide the intervention with fidelity, then each subsequent student, they're able to kind of provide the intervention on their own without coaching. Each student who completes the intervention, the nurse would complete a set of questionnaires sort of before and after that student completed the intervention. And then we do have a 1-year follow-up evaluation as well. And of those different sort of study components, like I mentioned, the only things that happen sort of during the school day are those 5 20-minute sessions with students that take place over the course of 5 to 6 weeks. And that's kind of the sort of bare bones outline of the study. I'm happy to answer any more specific questions you might have.
So we would not be getting consent from every parent for elementary school. It would really just be those identified.
That's correct.
So, yes. So when families are referred to us by a nurse, we complete a complete informed consent process with each family that consents and participates in the calm intervention. So yeah, each family that participates would be providing consent, and the idea is not necessarily that the nurse is providing an intervention to every student that they work with.
Thank you for that clarification, and Dr. Sevajanjic. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us, Doctor, and if we have any follow-up, we will ask the boards to please submit them by email, and we can forward them along to the superintendent.
Yes, and I'll pass those materials along. And thank you very much for letting me join you all.
Thank you. Nice evening. Okay, moving on. Approval of policy C19.8, students' attendance excuses dismissal. The Board of Education approved policy C19.8, students' attendance excuses dismissal. Ms. Maxon-Cannelli, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, you want to walk us through this quickly?
Sure. So this policy is coming to you. This is, again, what we call the one and done. So that's why I wrote everybody that email, just to alert you to that, for reasons which I think are obvious when you see words like quarantining and school days where we ship everybody full remote, usually weather related. This is something of immediate need. That is not to say that amendments aren't always welcome, but I am hoping that one way or the other that we can vote this out tonight. I didn't receive any questions, but I don't know if there are any now occurring to you.
Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, I just one question, I apologize for not submitting it in advance. Just out of curiosity, how does this compare to what other districts are doing or have done? Do we know?
I have no idea. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe Mr. Cummings does.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I can't speak for every district, but I know that this is a very practical issue that a lot of districts are trying to address. The power issue, for example, on as Ms. Maxon-Cannelli said, a weather-related remote learning day. those are all things that districts are working on and working through during this period of time. I think these issues have come up at different points during the year as we've learned more.
Was there any discussion about just staying home if you're awaiting test results? Would that fall under kind of quarantine? Students not necessarily sick, but just being responsible per our safety protocols?
That is part of the issue. I don't know, Dr. Parrish, are you able to speak to how the building administrators view this?
And I apologize for not forwarding that question when Mrs. Maxicanelli reached out.
I think it's on now. There we go. Zakia Parrish, Executive Director of Operations and Processes. So in terms of a student that's staying home as a result of a test or some other illness that's non-COVID related, we're still using the blended learning group authorized remote. So they would become a temporary virtual student. And that's also used in the case of quarantine or isolation as a result of a COVID related incident. So they're put into authorized remote, which is a temporary remote blended learning group. So their attendance is now moved to, along with the other students who have opted into always remote, and their attendance is taken based on their absence or presence in the Google Meet for that particular day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Picco.
Since we're on the topic, I'm wondering if we've received any state guidance on, you know, what you're calling it. I know every district is a little different in what they're calling, like remote absence, things like that. So maybe you have a better idea. Are people using different terminology than we are?
Every district uses their own terminology, but the way it gets coded to the state and PSIS is the same. So it's just a matter of the codes that you use in whatever your data management system is. So on Infinite Campus for us, that's what we're using internally.
Any other questions? Mrs. Maxicanelli?
One other thing I would be remiss if I didn't point out to you is just the reminder that these series of COVID policies, well, they're not COVID policies, they're policies that have been tailored to this time of COVID, all of which will expire automatically June 30th without any vote of the board. This policy does have a couple of changes that are solely in red, and those are changes being made to the permanent policy. These are not significant details, but for example, on page D, which we do our policies by letter, not by number, where you see those changes in red, those would be changes that will continue post June 30th. Everything in yellow is what will be disappearing, and I would be remiss if I didn't point that out.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I did make a comment on this, but I commented on a semicolon that I liked quite a bit, and I see something kind of more substantive now, so I apologize for that. Is there a reason that the? Oh, I'm sorry. On page B. Is there a reason that the two lists between the first 1 through 9 excused absences and the 10th absence onward are different? Is there a statutory reason? I mean, one of the things that we don't have in the second list is, you know, the other exceptional circumstances and extraordinary. And the language is not parallel here, which is confusing.
So for that specific one, obviously that's language we weren't looking at. The difference is that when you hit 10, that's viewed differently by the state. I don't know if Dr. Parrish, if you'd like to speak more to that, but that's why there are two separate lists.
No, I mean, I understand, and again, there may be a statutory basis for this, but I can see, you know, the reason for other exceptional circumstances to be in both of these lists, and it's only in the 1 through 9 list.
There is a statute, and Ms. Deasy can talk to the statute around
I mean, if that's
those.
the case, then I have no objection.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yes, there is a statute.
Well, it's not technically a statute. I'm calling DC. I'm the Executive Director of Personnel and Legal Services. It is a guidance that was issued in a memo by the State Department of Education, but it wasn't law that was passed by the state legislature.
That's good enough. Yeah, I was just noticing the non-parallel nature, so thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we vote? Okay, Seeing none, take it to the board. All in favor? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Maxicanelli, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Guernsey. All opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Ratelli. Motion carries 8. Okay, budget update for fiscal year 2021. Ms. Mansell? Cummings, I don't know if you want to give
Nope,
the floor first?
Ms.
or we
Mansell can jump right in here.
Hi there, is this still on? Okay.
I asked Ms. Mansell just to give us an update. Being the Board of Finance received an update, I figured that their meeting, just the way it played out, was before ours, so I wanted you to also have the information just so you can ask Ms. Mansell any questions.
Okay. So the projection that you received is an update as of the end of February. So the change since the second quarter report, 12/31, we went from a deficit of about 1.3 million to a deficit of about 500,000. And what I normally do is kind of go through the report and tell you what's there, but the numbers are clear. I think it's more important on this one to explain how we got there. So first, we have a hiring freeze. There's approximately 20 positions that are frozen. They're all non-certified except for 1.1 teaching positions. There's one exception to that. We are filling the maintenance supervisor position. And so associated with that would be the salaries and the benefits. Secondly, maintenance was able to give up several areas of funding, $100,000 in paving, $210,000 in snow removal. We still have one snow event budgeted or projected in case that does happen, but we were able to release the rest of it. There's about $150,000 roughly in maintenance projects from the outside dust collector at Ward and the second floor concession renovation at Ludlow, and about $92,000 in HVAC system cleaning that's being held for retro commissioning. So that's over $550,000 in funding right there. Also in travel reimbursement, people aren't traveling as much. We gained $40,000 there, and about $12,000 in tech training. In transportation, now that we're processing more invoices, the transportation itself hasn't changed, but the mail service, we were able to save about $56,000 there. In the support area, there was a correction there that I mentioned in the second quarter report. That's all that was a correction. Special ed, the projection did get worse through the end of February by about $200,000, and that's not unusual. So that's how we got down to the deficit of $500,000. In addition to that, what's not reflected here is there are school accounts and district instructional accounts that aren't reflected in here, but they're also frozen. So, we will need to expend additional funds, obviously, to continue instruction, but it's on a case-by-case basis. It'll be, released as needed. Moving forward with the full reopening now, the things that we really need to keep an eye on are sub-cost. If there's, more quarantining than there had been in the past, custodial overtime, utilities, and any tech repairs. So those are things that, we're monitoring everything constantly, and we will do this third quarter update as of the end of March, and that'll give us a few weeks of full in-person experience to see where we need to go from there. So that's where we're at. there's any questions.
Mr. Asa, followed by Mrs. Maxinelli.
Yeah, could you just, thank you. Could you give us a ballpark on the number that's there if we have no more snow events? That, and you say we have one in reserve, but if we don't need that, do we know approximately what that is?
What they gave up was 200, or what they were able to release was 210,000.
Understood.
Right.
So what is not released that potentially could be a month from now?
I don't know what the value of that is for
I'm
one
just
more
curious if it's a substantial number.
Mr. Papa George?
We are still holding approximately $40,000 for snow removal.
And with regard, while you're there, Mr. Papa George, to the HVAC cleaning, et cetera, can you just, because I can envision the public hearing this and raising a red flag. Can you just elaborate on why we don't need to spend this money right now?
It's not that we don't need to spend this money right now. We're still moving in the process, but with the retro commissioning coming up, hopefully once we get RTM approval, it'll be built into that and be able to move through, and we'll identify what locations should be identified and done first.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then one last question with regards, we keep hearing about the utilities and school going back full time and you know, utility costs going up, but did we not budget for utilities as if we were going to be open? And you have to go back. I apologize if I'm not remembering this right. Did we reduce our anticipated budget on utilities because we knew we weren't going to be in the buildings, or didn't we budget for this like a normal school year?
We budgeted for a normal school year, but for whatever reason, the usage has been down.
Okay, so it's been down, but moving forward, we shouldn't anticipate the utilities taking us over, correct?
No, what I'm saying is we have projected savings. Whether or not we will meet the full savings between now and the end of the year remains to be seen if our usage starts to tick up because for full removal, return.
Okay, I guess what I'm getting at is I understand the potential reduction, but that being said, what I don't understand is how we would have such a substantial increase that it would eat up those savings if we're basing it off of a baseline budget that we anticipated and planned for. So that was my question.
Yeah, I don't think it would eat it up. I'm just saying, I'm being cautious in saying that it's going to change. There's a lot of things here that could change with the full return. The positions that are frozen, we may have to release some of those. You know, there's lunch aids that may cost us more than what we anticipate. There's just
okay.
This is a difficult task in a normal year. You know, to do the projection month by month in a normal year is probably my least favorite thing to do. And
well, we appreciate your efforts.
Doing it this year, I can't even begin to explain how difficult it is.
Okay. Well, I think you answered my questions about the utilities. We're not necessarily foreseeing some random weird thing going on. We're just being cautious.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Maxinelli, followed by Ms. Jacobson.
And just to follow up on Mr. Ace's question, so in other words, the point being that looking at line 42, where it says electric, and that you are anticipating there being a surplus of 554,000, it's simply that number might not be as high as that, leaving us in an overall slightly larger hole, correct? Am I understanding this correctly?
So we're projecting a balance of 543.
Right. So you're saying that if conservatively, in fact, we start using more than what this is projected, that number might go down in terms of surplus.
500 or, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I just had two questions. First, you said something which hadn't appeared on here, at least I don't recall it, with instructional being frozen. Can you add some color to that? So what does that mean is not happening? Nobody wanted to pick that ball up. Bouncing ball.
So all of our instructional accounts at the district and the school level, as Ms. Mansell said, they go through either Dr. Parrish or I when a request is made, and they get approved at that level versus at the school or director level.
Right, so I'm asking, what does that look like? Therefore, what isn't being done or expended?
Like, what would be an example?
Yes.
Of what that might be?
There's a variety of things in each account. So, for example, there's a number of accounts, or I should say, every department has some PD funds that were expected to be expended with travel that may not have happened this year. There's other things, I know in the language arts account, for example, they had PD on small group instruction that they were not able to do. But then there's other things that they may put off for a year or put off for later as a result of the freeze. And then there's supplies as well, obviously, books and other things that perhaps we won't need.
And I'll say at the school level, it's the schools just really taking a hard look and identifying essential items that they need within the school and trying to make sure that the requisitions that they're submitting are meeting the needs of the students but aren't necessarily above and beyond what they might need in that particular moment. But, you know, they are able to submit those things to either myself or Dr. Zavajancic, and then we work through the process of approval or having them review the orders that they submitted.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just wondering about the color on that again. And then my second question was regarding the RLA principal. That's currently being filled by a current middle school assistant principal, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So how does the, and I know this has happened a while ago and for some reason it didn't click to ask, how is that position being filled then at the middle schools?
Both Ms. Tiley and Ms. Bannock, because it's a shared position between the two schools, identified an existing staff member to serve as the interim assistant principal.
So is that in any way resulting in a savings versus when we hired someone, a new person who was retired to come in?
Yes, it is. The staff member was not backfilled when she took the interim position.
So is this, on the page 2, is this 137, 731 the accurate number, or in fact, was it lower than that?
It would be lower. It wouldn't be significantly lower because there is still a para who's doing some of the work in that position. So it's not, well, we didn't backfill it and hire an interim teacher in that spot. There is still work to be done there. She was the tech integrator at one of the middle schools, so there is still tech work to be done around supporting students and teachers, obviously, right now in terms of their using the computers.
Okay, but would that be out of a different account? Or the point being, this number should be lower, ultimately.
We can take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jacobson.
Thank you. The school accounts, what line number is that on this document, Mrs. Munsell?
It's not in there. It's not reflected in there.
Yeah, can I don't know if anyone, this would be helpful for anyone else, but in the, you know how you have these comment sections or if there's another column, is there a way to be able to track some of these things that aren't on here so that over time we can see the changes in them? In other words, can there be something that shows what's been frozen or not happening, as Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly put it? Or does that not make sense on this document?
Well, is it really the big things you have shared? You know, in terms of school accounts, it might be, when you think about freezing, building principals, that level of detail from each school. I think that in terms of managing it, that list could be long in terms of.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's why I want to see it.
We're necessarily maybe not buying icing, not to use the whole icing example.
What percentage has been expended on those items at this point, up to this point? And I understand that it might vary by building, obviously, but solid estimate on expenditure of that item? That's been spent already. Percentage basically are we freezing?
The school allocation number, total was 2.2 million, something like that, and there was a balance of 900 and something thousand today when I checked it. I haven't monitored the
That's a
the
significant
district
percentage.
accounts. Well, like you said, it depends on what, it's not like it was in a year where we asked everybody to give back a certain percentage. Because certain things have already been expended. For instance, field trips. That was something that I told them that was frozen because we know that you're not going on field trips. But because it was so difficult to determine how much, because everything is on a case-by-case basis, how much they would be spending, I just know that there's a pot of money there, and I'm just counting on the 500,000 between the district and the school accounts to be there. And I'll make sure, I have to make sure that it comes from somewhere.
And we'll get detail for our next quarterly, like in terms of the different accounts of where we are for our next quarterly review in April, in terms
Sure.
of what the balances are, just to Ms. Jacobson's point and wanting to see, how it's progressing as we move towards the end of the year.
Yes, and the positions that were frozen, those are for fiscal year 21 positions. They're not for fiscal year 22 positions, right?
Current year positions.
Current year that we have open. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Mr. Peterson?
I kind of want to make note of the fact, Ms. Mansell mentioned this, but am I correct, Chair, that the Board of Finance has asked us for monthly reports on our progress in covering this shortfall?
We didn't get it. I don't know if it's going to be every month. We reported at the beginning of March, and then we're going to report as part of the quarterly in April. And then we haven't gotten past.
Yeah, I heard, I think I was the only one that heard it, but I heard they wanted to see us every month at the last meeting.
Well, I just want to record that I heard it too.
Okay, good.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Mansell. Okay, moving on, budget update fiscal year 21-22. Mr. Cummings?
Okay, I have a few things to talk about tonight. I wanted to talk about the 21-22 budget and where we are right now, and then also I want to talk briefly about the ESSER 2 funding, and then the relief bill that is, I guess, going to be, it's scheduled to be anyway voted on the reconciliation tomorrow in the House of Representatives. So in the 21-22 budget, I believe, as the board members know, the Board of Selectmen approved the First Selectwoman's budget yesterday afternoon, and that included the $2 million cut to the board's proposed budget. We have identified, after we had submitted our budget, the town identified potential savings in the health benefits, and Ms. Mansell worked to identify that figure. So that figure is around slightly north of $500,000. So of the $2 million we have to cut, about a quarter of that is going to potentially come from this reduction in the health benefits funding. We're going through the process right now. We're meeting Thursday. We've identified essentially a menu of potential other budget reductions. And on Thursday, the executive directors and myself are going to meet to begin to localize and finalize what those potential reductions might be. Knowing that there's still 2 months essentially before the board is going to be identifying and adopting the final budget for the 21-22 school year. So knowing that this is in a process and that we plan on coming to the board in April to talk further about what exactly those reductions may be. But we're in that process, and I will tell you, as I think I said last time we were together, certainly when we look at a level cut like that, and as the board well knows, you're looking at some issues around staffing and how you might reduce staffing in certain areas. One of the things that we are very conscious of, we're always very conscious of the fact that people occupy those roles, and when we're talking about staffing, we are talking about people. That's the first thing that we're keeping in mind. And the second thing that we're keeping in mind is that as we think about reductions like that, we're conscious of, one, trying to be as thoughtful and deliberate in the process as possible. In other words, keeping reductions away from student supports, student services, instruction. And also looking to make sure that whenever possible, that we're not actually eliminating a program, because we know on past experience that when a program is eliminated, it becomes very, very difficult to bring that program back. Again, it's a process we will engage in, and it's a process that, as we go forward, will begin to involve critical staff in that decision-making as well. But this is obviously going to be a very difficult process. So before I talk about the grants, I don't know if there's any questions around what our work is right now.
Any questions, Mrs. Maxicanelli?
I just want to make sure it's clear in case the public doesn't realize that $500,000 in health, that was information not available to the Board of Education at the time of our vote.
That information came after the board adopted their budget.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, is that number, the 500,000, at all likely to change based on who our staff is, the census at the time?
That is a preliminary rate that was issued by the state, so it is still subject to change. And what I would do is, when we are actually adjusting the budget in May, we will look at our head counts at that time and see if anything else needs to be adjusted.
Thank you, Ms. Mansell. I just think that's important just for us to remember that it's not necessarily, it's $500,000 with the information that we have right now, the estimate, but that could change at the end of May when we do our budget adjustments. Okay, any other questions about the budget, just where it is in terms of the process with the town? Okay, seeing none, you can go on to the grants.
Okay, so let's talk about ESSER 2 first. This is a funding that's due on April 5th. Fairfield, under the ESSER 2 funding, Fairfield Public Schools is getting $1,271,526. This is money that's going to come to us, we're understanding, over the course of 2 years. Information on this has been rather slow in coming, and detail is slow in coming. But we are right now working, the state, as part of the application, is requiring districts to complete a needs assessment. We met last week to begin to look at that needs assessment. We're meeting again on Friday to continue that work. I will tell you our preliminary conversation, we're being very mindful in both this grant and in the relief fund that's again working its way through Congress. We're being very mindful of the danger of funding cliffs. And if you're going to invest, if people are going to invest in staffing, that at some point that funding is going to go away, and you're only delaying certain problems. So we are, though, in ESSER 2, we're looking at two major areas, and one of those is COVID relief, PPE, that type of thing potentially. But the other one that we are looking at, it is an expectation of both the ESSER funding and the relief funding, is student learning loss. So we've talked about a couple things. One of those is some combination of after school, summer school programs to support students. The struggle with that always is, though, that those are voluntary programs, and the accessibility of students to actually participate in those programs, sometimes you're not necessarily getting all the students that you really need. We're not discounting that as a possibility, but it's not in itself perhaps what's fully what's needed. The other thing we're looking at is the potential expansion of supports for staff capacity. So we learned earlier tonight about the illiteracy program. Is there a possibility, and these are just questions that we're asking ourselves right now, that while we support right now in the board's budget is the support of identifying and supporting the kindergarten teachers, might we use the ESSER 2 funding to add grade 1 to that roster of supports for next year and expand the support? That we're better able to respond to student literacy needs in both grades next year, for example. How might math figure into that? So these, you know, and then what would be a potentially middle school or high school equivalent of that type of program? So what we want to do, ideally, is use the funding to support students, not with only one-off type programs, but leaving a lasting impact on staff capacity to improve instruction and the learning needs of students and meet the learning needs of students that would resonate past the funding cycle. So that's essentially where we are right now and trying to figure out how to best approach that. You know, I had experience 10, 11, 12 years ago now with ARA funding, and one of the great issues with ARA funding was it was wonderful when it happened, but when it went away, it hurt. And so trying to avoid those types of things. And there was an article, I think it was online, it might have been in the Post today, but it spoke to this very issue that a lot of towns are looking at right now. Trying to avoid funding cliffs down the road, and using the money wisely to kind of build, whether it's actual infrastructure in a town or professional learning infrastructure in a school system. Those are the types of things that we have to explore. So before I talk about the relief funding, I don't know if there's any questions on ESSER.
Ms. Pickup.
My February CES meeting, they mentioned that the funding has to be going towards new projects or programs. I know I emailed you. Is that true? Is it specific to what the funding can go to?
It is. Again, some of these details are still rather murky around it. There's a lot of flexibility in how it can be spent. You know, there was, and I'm going to, even as I say it, I'm going to draw a blank. There were 4 primary areas. One of them was learning loss. The other one was PPE, COVID equipment. There was issues around SEL. And the fourth one, does anybody?
HVAC.
HVAC, thank you. Those are the issues that funding is about. So those, but at the same time, you don't have to go for all 4. You can go for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you know. And you can use some of that funding to support expenses you've already had. So we're trying, you know, go back to Ms. Munsell's presentation on the current budget. We're trying not to use the funding for that if we can, because there's clearly a lot of needs in the district that we could use this funding for its original intent. But that possibility exists as well.
So it's a 2-year fund. Is part of it for this year and then part of it for next year?
It can be done that way. I don't think, though, that all the money, you can expend the funds now.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to sit on it, in other words.
Because some of the districts are doing the tutoring now that you're talking about.
Yes.
Mr. Asa.
So can you just clarify how could we relate spending this money on the Literacy Academy if it's not directly related to learning loss from COVID?
It would be related to expanding the Literacy Academy footprint, and it would be related to learning loss, because what you'd be doing is identifying teachers, training teachers, excuse me, to identify learning loss and then respond to it in the most appropriate way. I think one of the challenges that school systems are going to face with this funding is driven by the relatively short time frame that they'll have, for example, to implement a summer program. And they're going to rely on on past practices in building summer intervention, let's say a summer intervention program. But that past practice may not be cognizant or naive to exactly what kids are struggling with right now. So if you build a literacy, like a literacy intervention program in the summer that you've always done and you've always tried, but it's not aware of or thinking of the kids in front of the classroom, then it's going to miss its targets, particularly given the relatively short time frame to put something together. So as we look at this, a more sustainable model to us right now, and again, we're still in the planning stages of this, a more sustainable model is building staff capacity to make the right decisions and then implement the right solutions.
Okay, and I guess I should clarify, when I talked about, I was thinking about kindergartners next year and starting this identification, but they weren't in our school system during COVID, so that was my confusion there, was they weren't our students. So how could we say they had learning loss in our system during COVID if they weren't even in the system?
Right. Well, we would go with COVID under, kindergarten under the board's adopted budget, but we would add first grade under the ESSER funds.
Okay, thank you for that that's the clarification I was looking for.
Apologize, I wasn't clear on that.
And the other thing is, though, I think we need to be ready to identify areas, because if we do have this continued deficit, and if it grows, and there are areas that this money can be identified and allocated according to the distribution requirements, I don't think we should just, I understand the point of trying to use it for next year, but if there are areas that we come down to it and we need it, I just don't want to close that door.
We do know that there are areas that we can look at. One of them is the PPE, the COVID expenses that we've put in place, cleaning. Another one would be the equipment we bought for the K-12 classrooms to do live streaming. There's funds that we've expended this year that were not in the adapted budget that would fit the needs of the requirements of the grant.
Yeah, and I just think that we might be better off using a part of that to close that gap. So that's all I wanted to say.
Ms. Jacobson.
Couple and a follow-up. So in our needs assessment, in the areas that you're thinking about, I know that you need to provide data around that need. You're going to spend it this way. Here's the data that supports why we need to spend it that way. So do you have that at this time ready to go in terms of, I know that you need to get it in quickly, so are you prepared to be able to fill out that needs assessment with the detail that they're looking for?
Thank you. That's a great question. We do have now the Winter Star assessment results, and parenthetically, we're looking to present that data to the board in April. So we do have the Winter Star results. We have the UCLA trauma study that was done by the special ed. So we do have data points and data that we can use to justify the needs assessment.
Awesome. That's good news. The ESSER 1, not ESSER 2. I know you're talking about the PPE and things like that, but did we not receive enough in the ESSER 1 that covered our needs in that area?
Oh, ESSER 1.
ESSER 1, I know.
ESSER 1,
Ms. Mitchell, do you remember?
Chromebooks, right?
Because we got a designated,
Chromebooks.
designated amount for PPE health and then a designated amount for transportation, right?
Are you talking about CRF?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. Was it. Yeah.
Sorry, CRF. So totally different.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I want to keep in mind as well, around ESSER 2, that there could be requirements for next year that we don't know about yet that aren't in our budget as well.
It's very
So
true.
before we go spending a whole of $1 million, remember that there could be requirements that are well above $1 million that we don't know about at this point. Thank you.
There's a lot of things lurking out there in the bushes.
Any other questions about the budget?
We talk about the relief bill?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the relief bill. Now, more information was given on this. I believe you may have seen the governor's press conference yesterday, but So this is now again, these figures that I have are not yet finalized because the bill itself was not yet finalized, not yet an act. But the total funding that the state expects to get for the towns, all right, total funding for the towns in the state of Connecticut is $1.1 billion. So Fairfield, I'll get to Fairfield in a minute, but there's just a couple of things around this. One, of the money set aside, money being given to the local education agencies, 20% is for learning loss through evidence-based interventions that respond to students' SEL needs. So that's 220 million of the 1.1 billion. So again, 20% of whatever we as a town get, not as a town, as a Board of Education get, has to be spent on learning loss. And Fairfield is due to get, again, preliminarily, $3,158,131. Now, this is going to be spent through 2024, the end of 2024. All right, so this is 21, 22, 23, 24. There's a 4-year spend out of that amount of money. A couple of key provisions that were mentioned by the governor yesterday in the press conference, and if you saw it, Senator Murphy was also on that call. One is that the money is expended through the end of 2024, and there's an additional pot of money going to the towns. So this is just the money that's going to the Board of Education. But the governor also said that money is not to be used to lower taxes. So a couple things that came up in the Board of Selectmen conversation yesterday as they were talking about the budget and in the process of adopting the budget that really need to be clarified. One was, and there was speculation around this because a lot of the detail hadn't yet been shared. One was speculation that this money could possibly be used to, because it has a social emotional learning focus, could be used to support the request for the additional social workers at the elementary level. I want to be clear, again, because we were clear in our conversation as you adopted the budget, that the need for the additional social workers predates COVID. Our elementary principals have been asking for this for a number of years. And if it, our expectation is that the needs of students that predates COVID is going to be around after COVID. So if we were to fund additional social workers with this funding, at some point we're only postponing eventually the need to include it in our own budget, the additional supports. The other thing that was mentioned was, well, again, to that larger piece that this potentially could lower, the board could make up necessarily the funding of programs cut through this grant. Right now, as I said before, we're facing a budget reduction of $1.5 million. Set aside the health benefits, we're getting $3 million. So, using the grant to fill in the hole created by the proposed cut in our budget is going to be a short-term solution, if any. It doesn't really solve the problem. And it, again, 20% of it has to be about learning loss, so you take that right off the top of that. It's not going to address the need. So this is not a solution to our budget cut. And I think we have to be really clear about that. There was, again, that speculation yesterday, and it was based on not knowing because the information wasn't out yet. But after hearing the governor's press conference, and as we get more details, I think that's not going to work. So, again, if there's any questions on this.
Ms. Jacobson.
I just have a macro question, and maybe for Mrs. Munsell. Do we actually get the math on the entitlement? Like, in other words, do they say, okay, Fairfield, it's X, and here's how we came up with X? The buckets keep getting bigger, but the proportionate share isn't growing equivalently, so I'm just curious about the math.
Sorry, your question is how is it determined how much we get?
How it is. Okay. But I want to know if they give you the math.
No.
No.
Okay.
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 I'd kind of be interested to seeing the math, if we can find the math somehow.
As you know, it's Title I. But,
I know, but
yeah, I don't know
it's
exactly
not
the proportion.
shaken out that way.
No, it's something that we keep an eye out. Yeah, no, I agree. It should be transparent as these figures.
Any other questions? Ms. Guernsey?
Sorry, just a really quick one about the relief bill. What is the other 80%? What are the parameters of that usage? Are there? I mean,
No, there really isn't. It doesn't get into that, and I think again that, and again, more detail might be coming, but that was the only set aside that was mentioned.
Sorry, can I follow up on that?
Yep.
I mean, the language of the uses is in the act, if you want to read the act. You know, it's similar to the CARES Act and whatnot, but a little bit broader because it includes like the learning loss and whatnot, but it is in the various acts.
I will note that there is some expectation for potentially education technology.
Yeah.
And equity around access.
Yeah. Just support of remote learning and learning loss associated with those students through remote learning also. And portion of it going to special education I think this last go round.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some broad language in there, just like the ongoing needs due to the pandemic. You know, there's some broad language around that
Like
too.
recognizing that's a supplemental, all of these supplemental needs that districts are identifying as time goes on, and not to supplant, funding that is going to be ongoing just to run the school district, hopefully, once we get past COVID. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So the budget is going before the Board of Finance. The first select woman is presenting her budget on Thursday to Board of Finance for those who are following along, and they're beginning their budget review next week. Okay, recommend a motion, approval of the minutes. The Board of Education approved the minutes from January 28th, 2021 regular meeting and February 9th, 2021 regular meeting. Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Ms. Pitko. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes? Motion carries 9. Superintendent's report, we got the reopening update at the beginning. Is there anything else to add, Mr. Cummings?
No, that was it.
Thank you. Committee liaison reports. Ms. Rotelli.
SEPTA's next meeting is March 31st at 7:30. They are looking for volunteers. It is nominating season, so come join us. And if you want to learn more, you want to volunteer, go to fairfieldsepta.org and look for links to the meeting.
Any other committee? Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, we had the Finance and Budget Committee meeting last week. We got a preview of some of the financials we got from Ms. Mansell tonight. So that was very helpful, and more detail tonight. So it's nice to see those coming together. The big thing that we tried to do was brainstorm some places to begin with structural change, which is something that I know Ms. Vitale wants to put on our full board agenda at some point. My general thought was to try to do some of the legwork in advance so we can get some early answers from administration about what things might be feasible, what things might take longer, what things would need to wait for another year, just to help streamline that. I will be putting together a broad list of our everything that we discussed in that meeting. Certainly don't want to foreclose discussion on any other topic, but again, just kind of wanted to lay some groundwork so that we would try to do some prep work about that. I also want to say on Holland Hill Building Committee, I can't remember what the last time I gave you an update was. There was a meeting about a week and a half ago. Mr. Quinn suggested he was about ready to reach out to you to schedule a time to basically turn over the keys. So I know it's dragging out, but it's almost done.
Roger Sherman, Building Committee, is getting to that point also, almost ready. Hopefully, we're thinking maybe April 20th meeting. So maybe we could just have a meeting of handing over the keys of multiple projects, which would be wonderful. Ms. Maxon Canelli.
Just very briefly, in policy, we are beginning to turn towards looking at a grading policy, which at present Fairfield Public Schools does not have a grading policy. And I have, with the consent of the policy committee, assured Mr. Cummings that this is something where stakeholder buy-in is an essential component, that the staff is going to start turning their attention to volunteers starting to pull this together. But I did stress to Mr. Cummings that it is not their top priority. We want to turn towards it. We've been meaning to for years, but that they have teaching to do. And so they've got a world to be ready for. So while I'd hoped to be further along at this point, the fact that we're not is fine, but I'm putting it out there to the board only because if it's a topic on which you have any thoughts at our next meeting, we're going to have it as just a discussion item, because if there are certain things that we have in mind, we want to let the staff know that up front, that if there are things we're looking for and they weren't thinking that way, that this way they can have a topic or have that as part of their discussion to do with as they will. So I just put that out to the board, that if there are issues that have occurred to you yet with grading policy, you want to crack down on those first graders, Mr. Asa, or whatever it may be, just to please, if you could forward that to me in any informal means. Because again, we are starting from scratch. We do not have a policy at present for you to read and reflect on. So, thank you.
Ms. Jacobson.
Am I allowed to ask a follow-up to Mr. Peterson's report?
Sure.
Okay, 2 quick questions. I assume that if anyone has ideas to share with you, that you would like that input from board members?
Absolutely.
Okay, and as you are working on these lists of possible structural change items, are we going to, as a body, have a conversation prior to that around what that actually means?
I think that's more a question for Ms. Vitale, but I'm certainly very open to that conversation. No, that's fine, and my sole objective was to just get something moving.
And we can add that discussion. Right now, we do not have a meeting scheduled on our calendar for the first week in April. I'm going to ask the board for April 6th, that Tuesday. We didn't schedule it at that time just because we didn't know what the budget schedule was going to be for Board of Finance and RTM. So just availability for Tuesday, April 6th. Let's plan on our meeting. We were talking about adding the district improvement plan, just a discussion of that back to the agenda, being that at our last meeting we kind of ran out of time on that. I think that we can maybe add a discussion on just structural change and just getting us all on the same page in terms of definition. Because I think that would be informative just for the Finance Committee's work as well as just the work informing the district improvement plan and how we want to approach that. Ms. Pitko?
Mr. Cummings, is the reopening committee stopped?
But we're suspended right now.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli?
Just confirming, what time were you planning on for that meeting?
7:30.
Because we have policy, so I just want to check.
And just Mrs. Maxon Cannelli and I met with, just in terms of the diversity work, being that started with the district last month. And we'll just let you know that that work has begun, following up with just teachers and with the Equity Coalition. And when's that next meeting? This week? So just want to let you know that that work has begun. Open board comment? Stratfield PTA.
No, you could go.
Let me I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry, Ms. Pitko. I neglected to just let everybody know at the beginning of the meeting. Stratfield PTA was kind enough to drop off this little goodie basket as a means of thank you to the board. They actually dropped it off in January, but we haven't met. So I just want to thank them for sharing this. So before you leave, come and get a little bit of Stratfield bling. I don't have my t-shirt shooter, and I'll say,
For the record, we have met, just not in person.
We met not in person. we haven't met in physically here, so we could just, pass this out. We've got cups and decals. So thank you. And it's Board of Education Appreciation Month this month for CABE, I think. So I saw that posted today. So thanks for the shout out to those on social media. And this is such a nice way to celebrate. So just want to extend our thanks. Ms. Pitko.
I was just hoping we could get an update from Mr. Cummings about students who are in RLA and their specials teachers. Was that worked out?
They're in the process of working that. We'll have an update for the board, I believe, next week.
Any other comment? Okay, seeing none. Public comment, once again, to the public. You can just send us to the public comment email address or submit comment through the form on the website. And with that, motion to adjourn. Mr. Asa, seconded by Ms. Peterson. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. We are adjourned. Thank you. Don't leave until you